Chapter 15, The Battle That Shook the World PT1. As Issei awoke, the first thing that came to his mind was the fight he was about to have with Great Red. He knew this fight would be his toughest one to date. He had no words as to what it would entail and how far he would need to be pushed to win it. He thought back to what Cockbill said about Great Red having the home field advantage. He was right. Great Red was one of the first beings that existed and took up his residence in the dimensional gap, so it would be expected of him to have gotten used to it. Issei knew it would be a tough fight when he stepped in there. He would have to take the fight from the gap, however there was the question of how he would do that. The only way he could was use his power to rip a tear through the dimension, and if he did that it would be a waste of power. He was suddenly brought out of his thoughts as he felt movement on his bed. He looked down to see Rainier, Calawarner, Tiamat, and Kuroka all sleeping in his bed. Naked. That's when he felt the same sensation he felt before when the fight with Tiamat ended. His instincts were growing stronger every day. He remembered what Drake said about it. That it was similar to a heat phase, and it was growing stronger. Quickly shaking off those thoughts, he managed to weave his way out from the girls who had a death grip on him and proceeded to go downstairs to prepare for the fight. As he walked downstairs, he noticed some lights on. He wondered who it could be at this hour, since after all it was still pretty early, so he was surprised to see Penemu watching TV. Seeing no one else downstairs, he sat down next to her, which made her jump a bit. She obviously was surprised to see him down here, and she was alone with him. "So you're the new member, huh?" he mumbled to himself. She didn't know what to say, and she knew she had to say something to avoid suspicion. However, what she didn't know is this conversation was about to change her whole world and everything she knew. Her morals and ideals were going to be thrown out the window, with no hope of returning. "So what made you want to join up with us, huh? I mean, everyone has some reason to want to start anew," he said. She wondered what he meant by that. Azazel has been paranoid along with the other factions. They have started mobilizing to prepare for war. It was just too much. She lied. It was somewhat the truth, but somewhat a lie. She stared curiously at him as he looked at her. He then laughed. "Serves them right after all that happened to me. They deserve what is coming," he said to himself. She heard it though, and it made her wonder what really happened. Sure, she heard from Azazel the gist of it, but she knew there was more to it. So with her here now, she wanted to know the full truth badly. "Can I ask what happened?" she asked. He looked at her for a second. He was about to speak up, but she continued. "Azazel did tell me somewhat of what happened, but he never really did go in full detail what made the betrayal so tough on you," she said softly. She honestly had no idea why she was saying this. Maybe it was a part of her starting to put the pieces together. However, another part wondered would she like the outcome when she learned what truly happened. She listened to him sigh. She knew it was tough for him to talk about, but this, if he was hesitating, it meant there was definitely more to it than she originally thought. "I'm sure you know of the peerage I was in?" he asked. She nodded. "Rias Gremmaries," she answered. She didn't miss the scowl when he heard her name. "Well, it started around my second year at Q Academy. I was a blatant pervert, I'll admit it," he started with a chuckle. She smiled a bit. It seemed there was a piece of him that wasn't focused on his goals, more like just relaxing and having fun. She listened to him as he continued. "It was when I was asked on a date," he continued. She didn't fail to notice him cringing when he said the final word of his sentence. She wondered what was going on. "What happened on this date?" she asked quickly. He sighed and looked at her. "I died," he said. She gasped and put her mouth on her hands. How had she never heard of this? Why didn't they think to mention this was one of the reasons this whole situation was because of? "What happened?" she asked. She feared the answer. After all, he was here now, so that meant only one thing. "Reincarnation. I was reincarnated by her," he said. She nodded and ushered him to continue. She understood how hard this was for him. "I was content living in her peerage actually. You see, I loved that woman. I fought time and time again on her behalf, nearly died twice in her name. I even sacrificed part of my body to beat the Phoenix in a duel to free her from that marriage." He spat. Tears were threatening to come out, not from just Penemu's eyes, but Issei's too. He was reliving one of his most painful parts of his life and how it all came crashing down. He started to speak again. "It was after Cockabeel was defeated that I was truly happy and content with living like that. That is until it happened," he said. She looked up at him to see him staring at the wall. It was an empty stare. There was so much emotion in his voice as he continued. "It was a normal day for me, however, except for the fact I was being ignored by everyone. I had no idea what I had possibly done to make them avoid me like that. I wanted so bad to do something, to apologize for anything I had possibly done, but every single time I tried they wouldn't even acknowledge me," he continued. She listened sadly as his voice finally broke, and she was starting to feel what he felt. "It wasn't until the end of the school day that I had took another route home, and I accidentally stumbled upon the spot where I died on my date," he said. Something was itching her to find out who killed him, so she asked. "Who was with you on that date?" she asked. He sighed and looked at her. She was confused when he had a small smile. "Rainier," he said. That made her angry. She wanted to strangle the girl. She was brought out of her thoughts when Issei's hand landed on her shoulder. "Don't be angry with her. You see, I forgave her a long time ago. In reality, I kind of realized what she was doing, even if she was ordered to do it. I knew that there might be more underneath the surface due to the fact I started to think about the date more. That's when I came across the conclusion that she knew all about the date and wanted to pick up the scraps. She wanted to be my savior, so I'd follow her blindly without a question. It just pisses me off even more when I think about it all and put the pieces together. After all I did for her, she just throws me away," he explained. Penemu was mortified at his story. She had no idea that so much happened to him. "So after I was utterly betrayed by all of them, I ripped into each and every one of them and purged my pieces in front of them. Afterwards, I met Bahamut in purgatory and accepted his offer, and I don't regret it one bit," he explained. He suddenly looked over at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock. It was almost time for him to go to Yasaka's. He looked at her and smiled. She was instantly surprised when she was wrapped in a hug. "Thank you, I needed someone to talk to. I needed to let it out," he said softly. Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe it. She numbly nodded as he stood up. It was time for his battle, and he needed to prepare himself. She watched him as he walked out the front door. She couldn't believe what was said during their conversation. She had some serious thinking to do. As Issei walked on outside of the mansion, he turned his thoughts to the battle. He needed to come up with a strategy. "Drag Bahamut, any ideas to help me in this fight?" he asked his dragons. "You will be pushed, there is no doubt in my mind. However, you have pure power over him. It's a matter of merely unlocking it and using it. You have to find something that drives you forward and makes you evolve and break through your shell and gain a new reach of power. What that Fallen said about taking him out of the dimensional gap is true. Once you tear through it, you will be able to use your environment to your advantage," Bahamut replied. Issei nodded and hummed in thought. "You could try to stall and continuously boost until you have enough to overpower him. However, I don't think he will be that stupid and not realize what you're doing," Drag added. He was right. Great Red wouldn't give him that luxury. He might be able to slip in a few boosts every now and then, but it would be small. Great Red wouldn't let up, he knew that much. It was time. With barely any thoughts, he released his wings and took off towards Kyoto. He arrived there shortly. It was about a 15-minute flight, and he finally spotted the shrine sitting atop the hill. Quickly landing in front of it, he tucked his wings back in and walked to the front door. Swiftly knocking on it, he waited a few moments before it was opened. It was a shrine maiden. She looked confused when she saw him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Yasaka about something," he said. She blinked but nonetheless let him inside. He quickly thanked her and proceeded to Yasaka's office. He stopped at the door and knocked a few times. There was no response. After a few moments, he heard a reply telling him to come in. He opened the door to see Yasaka and a new person. It was a woman. Issei could instantly tell she was powerful. She was a god after all. It hit him like a train. White and red dress, sleek black hair that flowed down her shoulders. The aura of the sun was practically flowing off of her. She had a mischievous look in her eyes as they both looked at each other. It was Amaterasu, goddess of the sun. Issei was stunned by her beauty. Issei Hyoudou, she quickly asked. He chuckled. It seemed they had already been told about him. Yes, and you are Amaterasu, he replied. She chuckled as well. It seems we may be working together in the future. Care to explain why you are waging war against the three factions? She asked quizzically. It seemed Yasaka didn't tell her about his betrayal. In a way, he respected her for that. It was sort of like a privacy matter, but nonetheless he began to tell his story, and this time he went into detail like he did before with Penemu. Needless to say, both of the women were utterly horrified at his tale. Amaterasu actually had tears threatening to spill. She never thought someone could be that cruel to someone who did all that for them. Issei quickly found himself embraced by the goddess. I'm so sorry you went through all that, she screeched. Issei blinked. He clearly wasn't expecting this to happen. However, he slowly lost himself in the embrace with the goddess. A few moments later, he pulled away and looked at Yasaka. Now to why I'm here, he said. They both looked at him. I was wondering why you dropped in so suddenly, she replied quickly. He sighed and composed himself. He was about to ask her something very tough for her to do, not that she couldn't do it. It was just a very delicate subject, and he knew that. The Dragon Gate was a very useful tool after all. I need you to open the Dragon Gate, he said. Their eyes widened. What was he planning? Care to explain why? She asked seriously. He looked at her dead in the eye and replied. I'm not sure if you know this, but I was recently unconscious due to an evolution I was undergoing. While I was asleep for that time, I was brought to the dimensional gap by Great Red himself. We had a very important conversation, he said. They once again widened their eyes and gasped. He was visited by the Apocalypse Dragon. What did he want? Amaterasu asked quickly. He sighed and spoke up. I'm to have a fight with him. He has intel that would be very useful to our cause. He said he would join us if I proved myself to him. That's why I need you to open it, then I will step through it and teleport to him, he explained. Yasaka was silent for a few moments. Very well, just know it's a one-way trip, she said. He nodded and they all entered a magic circle and appeared outside the shrine. Yasaka stepped forward and glowed a bright gold. Suddenly, a large magic circle appeared above them. Soon they could see the dimensional gap through it. Issei looked at it and knew it was time. Thank you, he said. He then flew up to it and flew right through it. He was finally in the dimensional gap. They were right. He could feel the pressure weighing him down in this place. He was suddenly brought out of his thoughts as the dragon he was fighting suddenly flew through a portal. He was staring right at the massive beast. I didn't think I'd actually see you here, ha, Great Red chuckled. Issei blinked. There was no going back now. So are we going to do this? He asked. Great Red snorted, then a dark red glow covered him. Issei had to cover his eyes as it grew brighter. After a few moments it died down and Issei was looking at a new figure. It was Great Red in his human form. He had spiky crimson red hair with a sleek leather jacket that looked like it belonged to a biker. The jacket itself had blood red flame patterns that trailed down his arms. The pants matched the jacket. Issei stared at the golden eyes that looked back at him with a smirk. Time to prove your worth, Issei Hyoudou, he said. Issei nodded and they both dashed forwards at each other with blinding speeds. Issei grunted a bit as his fist met Great Red's elbow. He was fast and timed his blocks well. Issei would need do the same to be able to land a successful hit on him. Suddenly Great Red vanished. Issei looked around hurriedly, but alas, he was nowhere in sight. Suddenly he lurched forwards, gasping for air. He looked down to see that Great Red delivered a sucker punch to his solar plexus. He felt a searing pain in his side as he was kicked across the gap. Issei got back up and knew now that Great Red wasn't pulling his punches at all. Come on, is that all you seriously got? He taunted. Issei just clenched his fist. Soon a crimson aura covered his arm. Soon it condensed and the boosted gear took its place. Booster. Great Red just grinned and adopted a blood-red glow as they continued to trade blows. Issei was starting to see why Great Red was such a tough opponent. He had years to perfect his abilities to their maxes, while he had only a few weeks. However, that didn't stop him. He continued to press on the Apocalypse Dragon. Great Red knew this boy had potential. He quickly blocked a punch that was sent towards his face but didn't see the knee coming. He lurched forwards as he felt the powerhouse knee that was delivered. Issei quickly followed it up with a haymaker that connected with Great Red's ribs. As Great Red regained his bearings, he started to charge up a massive energy blast. Issei's eyes widened at the size of it. It was bigger than anything he had ever made. He quickly decided he had no choice but to match it with a sphere of annihilation, but he needed more power. Welsh Dragon Annihilation Balance Breaker. A large amount of energy started to condense on Issei as he went into his balance breaker. Great Red only widened his grin as he saw the armor. The energy ball he was charging kept on growing. Issei quickly stuck out both of his hands in a V fashion. He started to form two spheres of annihilation. As they grew in size, he put his hands together and merged the two spheres into one gigantic sphere. Great Red didn't waste any time in throwing his energy ball, neither did Issei. Issei watched as the two energy balls collided with each other. They were pressing against each other, trying to overpower the other one. It was a stalemate between the two balls. Soon Great Red charged another energy ball and threw it at them, backing his own energy ball with another one. Issei grunted as he felt the energy overpower his own. Issei needed to think of a plan, and fast, before they exploded. The blast would be gigantic. Boost X15. Great Red raised an eyebrow as he saw what Issei was doing. He obviously had some plan. He quickly raised his hands up and started to form another sphere, but this one he was forming was going to be the biggest one he ever made. Slowly the black orb appeared above his hands. Boost X5. Suddenly the orb grew in size. Great Red understood what he was doing now. He was boosting while forming the sphere to make it even larger. Soon it grew twice the size as the previous one. Great Red knew he didn't have enough time as Issei threw the sphere. He didn't have enough time to charge up another energy blast to counter those spheres. Soon the spheres had merged and produced a gigantic one, effectively swallowing it whole. That was pretty impressive. Quick thinking Issei, using the boosted gear to power those spheres even more. Now the question is, can you keep that thinking going and adapt quickly in a situation? Great Red said with a grin. Issei wondered what he was planning. He knew he had something up his sleeve. Suddenly Great Red held his hands out in the same fashion Issei did earlier. He summoned two medium-sized energy balls. Issei was watching him carefully. Suddenly the two balls split into several smaller balls and shot towards Issei. Suddenly most of them disappeared. Issei widened his eyes as he saw it. He looked to Great Red to see him smirking. There were two of them still coming towards him though. He needed to take care of them first. Blade. He quickly slashed both of them, making them dissipate. Careful Issei, he has used the gap to his advantage. He sent those energy balls through wormholes to strike you at random. Watch your back. Bahamut tried to explain, but it was too late. Issei was struck in the back suddenly. He cursed as he got up. I think it's time to take this fight somewhere else where he doesn't have the advantage, Drake added. Issei agreed, however he didn't know how though. He is right, Issei. There is only one way you can currently do that though. With an ability you used only once, it was against Hades in the underworld. Armageddon's call will bring out your true power, but it is an ability that comes with a cost. It can only be maintained for a short period before it destroys you from the inside. The level of power would literally rip you apart if you used it too much. I will activate it. You be ready to unleash every ounce of power you got, Bahamut explained. Issei nodded numbly. Great Red rose an eyebrow as he saw Issei standing still. He suddenly felt an increase in energy. It was massive. Issei suddenly felt something that was akin to a flame being doused in gasoline. He felt it deep within himself. It was roaring, bursting with energy. Great Red quickly blocked with his hands as he felt the massive energy roll off of him in waves. He looked to the boy to see him covered in a blood-red glow. This energy was massive and was something he never thought he'd see from this boy. Suddenly, the whole dimension started to shake and crack. Great Red's eyes widened as he now understood what the boy was trying to do, and it was working. Before they knew it, they were both sucked into a vortex and appeared in the underworld. Issei's power-up suddenly disappeared as he stood back up and looked around. He knew where he was. He was very close to the Mrbabybornree estate. I must say I'm impressed, using something like that to rip a tear in the gap and send us out of it. You knew if you got me out of it you'd have a better chance. Very smart indeed, Great Red said suddenly. Issei looked at him. He felt that something was coming. However, that doesn't mean this is over just yet, he said loudly. He was about to charge but stopped suddenly as he felt something was off with the boy. He watched as the boy fell on one knee and started to breathe slowly. It was like he was having a hard time. Issei was feeling lightheaded and he had a splitting headache pounding. His vision started to act up. He was seeing things like it was tunnel vision. Great Red stood there silent. The boy wasn't hurt or injured. No, this was something else. Something was changing. Something was going to happen. He stood there silent, waiting for their second part of their fight, and he knew it was going to be big. Chapter 16, The Battle That Shook the World PT2. The underworld wasn't going to know what hit it very soon. Near the Mrbabybornree estate were two very powerful people who were about to continue their fight. Surzech was sitting in his office when he felt the massive energy spike in the area. He quickly jumped in his magic circle and appeared, surprisingly, at the estate. He wondered what was going on. You felt it too, a voice asked. It was female. He turned around to see Seraphal right beside him. Soon two other circles appeared and the other Satans stepped out. The four great Satans were about to witness a battle like none other. So you guys felt it too, Ajuka said aloud. They turned to the Beelzebub and watched as he walked towards the source of the power they all felt, and they would be shocked to see who it was. As they climbed up a hill, the first thing they saw was the estate for all to see. Isn't that? Seraphal asked while looking to Surzech. He nodded and spoke up. Yes, the Mrbabybornree estate where my sister's peerage is currently. We decided it wasn't safe anymore in Kyoto for them, he said. Seraphal looked confused for a bit. Wasn't there two potential recruits for her peerage in Kyoto? She asked suddenly. He nodded once again and replied to her. Yes, there were, however, with whereabouts on Hyoudou currently unknown, we decided it was best to hold off on new recruits and move them into the underworld, just in case Hyoudou decided to strike, he said. Suddenly Ajuka paled at what he saw. Speaking of Hyoudou, he started. The rest of them followed his eyesight and where he was pointing to, and their eyes widened as they took in the scene before them. What is he doing here? Seraphal said through gritted teeth. Surzech was silent. He was looking at the other man who was across from Issei. He had a very powerful energy coming off of him. It was contained though. He looked to the other Satans to see them looking at the man. Who is that? Ajuka asked curiously. Everyone else was wondering the same thing, and why was Hyoudou there with him? I have no idea, Seraphal said. Surzech was about to speak up, but the man started to speak in a voice that radiated power. I must say I am impressed, using something like that to rip a tear in the gap and send us out of it. You knew if you got me out of it, you would have a better chance at beating me. Very smart indeed, he said aloud. Their eyes widened. Did the gap mean the dimensional gap? That's what they were wondering as they watched Issei lift his head up. Does he mean the dimensional gap? Seraphal asked. No one answered her. They were silent. They didn't know what to think. However, that doesn't mean this is over just yet, he said suddenly. They looked as the man was about to charge towards Issei but stopped suddenly. They started to wonder what was going on. No one was moving. They were just standing there. Suddenly they saw Issei fall on one knee, and their confusion rose even more. They watched for what seemed an eternity as Issei was still on his knees. "What's happening?" Ajuka muttered to himself. Everyone heard him and wondered the same thing. "There isn't rise in energy at all, nothing at all. Do you think he was exhausted to the point of his defeat by this man?" Serafal asked aloud. They all thought about it for a moment. "No, it can't be that," Surzech said suddenly. They all turned to him. He sighed and started to explain. "The boy's power is truly horrifying to witness firsthand. This is different. His energy hasn't dropped or risen at all. It almost as if it ceased to accommodate for a change," he said aloud. Their eyes widened as they heard him. "So you're saying that the boy's energy has halted itself in order to make way for a change to continue?" Ajuka said suddenly. Surzech nodded solemnly and spoke up. "It seems so," he said. Serafal looked down at the kneeling form of Issei. She wondered what was going to happen now. Suddenly Issei got up and just stared at the man. They all looked at him to see what he was going to do. "Can you feel it? Is it resonating deep within you?" the man suddenly asked. They wondered what he meant by that. Whatever it was, he knew what was coming. "That energy you have, it is something all right. The power you wield is no doubt a dangerous tool that even me could be hard-pressed if you went full power," he said. They looked to Issei to see him starting to get his bearings back. They wondered what changed within him. Issei himself knew something was happening to him from the inside. He had a sneaky suspicion to what it was. Suddenly, against his own volition, his wings came out. "What the?" he muttered as he saw them. He looked to his opponent and spoke up. "You know what is going on, don't you, Great Red?" he said aloud. Issei knew the four Satans were watching him, so he wanted them to witness what was about to happen. They paled as they heard the name of the man. Did he just say what I thought he said?" Ajuka said aloud. Surzech's eyes widened and he nodded numbly. "The Apocalypse Dragon," Serafal muttered in disbelief. They were about to witness a battle that would shake everything up again. "So it's starting," Great Red said suddenly. Their eyes widened again for the umpteenth time that day as they heard him speak. What was starting, they all thought. They all backed up quickly as a massive amount of energy started to roll off Issei. Even Great Red had to put up a guard to protect him from the massive energy that was coming from Issei. The four Satans were able to peer over at the battle to see a blood-red glow covering Issei. Suddenly, all the energy he was putting out stopped dead in its tracks. Issei started to roar in agony as he felt all his bones crack and shift. Everyone watched as he started to grow in size. His skin started to turn harder. It turned into bloody red scales that covered his body as he grew even more. His roar started to turn more animalistic and primal. It was a dragon's roar. The ground started to shake violently as he kept growing in size. Suddenly, a spiky gray and blood-red tail sprouted out near his tailbone. Their eyes widened again as they realized he was turning into a dragon. It was 10 minutes later and the shaking finally subsided, and they looked to where Issei was to see something that showed them the true power he had. In Issei's place was a 50-foot-tall dragon with blood-red scales and sleek gray outlines. The wings were released to their full size of a 75-foot wingspan that reached out for all to see. This was his full dragon form, and it was incredibly intimidating. Great Red didn't seem intimidated. He just smirked as the behemoth stared down at him with its golden eyes. "So this is your full dragon form, huh? Impressive, kid. Now it's time to show me what you can do with it," he shouted in excitement. He was suddenly covered in his own glow. He was about to transform into his form. However, Issei's tail wrapped around him quickly. Great Red was quickly surprised as he was thrown towards the estate. It seemed the boy was getting used to his new form very quickly. It was time for Great Red to step it up a bit. With the Satans, they didn't expect that to happen. Surzech's eyes widened as he saw the Apocalypse Dragon get thrown towards the estate. He instantly felt worried for everyone inside. It was obvious to him the estate was going to suffer a lot of collateral damage. "What's going on?" a voice behind him asked. He turned around to see his mother Venelana and his father, along with his sister and her peerage. It seemed they got out just in time. "A battle like none other is underway," he said. Rias was instantly confused. One moment she and her peerage were watching TV and the shaking started. They all quickly rushed to get everyone out. They had no idea what was going on. "What battle?" she asked quickly. Seraphal looked to Rias and spoke up. "Look for yourself," she said. Rias and her peerage looked to where she was pointing and looked to see the dragon that stood above them all. It was gigantic in her mind. "What the?" Aquino muttered. Kiba rubbed his eyes a few times. "Who is that?" Rias asked. Zerzech looked at her and replied. "That is your ex-spawn Issei Hyoudou," he said. A bunch of gasps came from the peerage. They looked the dragon to see its golden eyes watching the wreckage of the estate. "Who is he fighting?" Aquino asked suddenly. Seraphal looked at them again and replied. "He is fighting the apocalypse dragon," she said. They were shocked as they heard her. He was fighting Great Red. They knew now he was insanely powerful and would deliver on his promise. They all turned their eyes to the wreckage of the estate as they felt a massive rise in energy. "Ha, that was a good one, Issei," Great Red chuckled. They watched as the dragon himself took flight. He was no longer in his human form. They were watching a battle between two dragons that weren't pulling any punches. Suddenly Great Red swooped behind Issei and grabbed his tail. He proceeded to spin around and send Issei crashing to the ground. The ground splintered and cracked as he crashed into it. The estate started to crumble from the massive amount of damage that was being caused. It was beyond repair. Everyone watched as Issei took flight once again and clawed at Great Red. It seemed they were doing some damage to each other, but they weren't doing anything fatal. The battle continued on as they watched both of them exchange blows, but there wasn't a sign of a victor yet. The battle seemed endless as both of them continued to charge at each other again and again. Suddenly Issei opened his mouth and a small fireball started to form and grow. Soon it grew bigger and Issei finally shot out a torrent of flames that were sent hurtling towards the apocalypse dragon. Great Red had barely enough time to put up a guard and block the stream of fire coming at him. After he did, he looked at Issei. This boy was clearly something else. He proved him wrong on multiple occasions. Now it was time to make this battle even better. Soon a glow of his own covered Great Red as he flew at Issei and wrapped him up in his tail like he was earlier. Great Red wasted no time and spun around for a good bit and launched up in the air. Great Red followed it up with an energy blast of his own. It was sent hurtling towards Issei's rough dragon body. As it hit its target, a roar came out. Issei knew he needed to get out of the form and take the fight back in his human form, but he didn't know how to. "Bahamut, how do I get out of my dragon form?" he asked the dragon in his head. Issei waited for a response. A few seconds later, he got one. "It's like your balance breaker or the Juggernaut Drive. All you need to do is will it, and it will happen. You just need to want it, and you will come out," Bahamut explained. Issei knew it was time to come out of the form and take it from there. Everyone watching the battle was surprised when it paused. They looked to Issei and Great Red to see them in a stare-off. Great Red wasn't making any moves, neither was Issei. Suddenly the same blood-red glow covered Issei, but this time it started to get brighter by every second. They had to cover their eyes as it started to get too intense to look at. They heard what sounded like screeching, but it was distorted and warped. Once the blinding light subsided, they looked back to the battlefield to see something that shocked them. It was Issei in his human form, but it was different. It seemed transforming into a dragon changed his appearance. He had streaks of blood-red hair, along with some grays and crimsons. His eyes were a mix of crimson and gold as they stared up at the massive dragon that was above him. He seemed to radiate power in every direction. It was tamed, though. "So you've learned how to come in and out of that form at will, huh? You are a fast learner indeed, Issei Hyoudou," Great Red said, impressed. He glowed a few minutes and returned back to his human form. Soon they were standing a mere 10 feet from each other and ready to attack at a moment's notice. I must say this was more than I expected. They had told me to expect this to be my toughest battle, and yet I'm yearning for more, Issei roared. Great Red grinned and charged at the same time Issei did, both of them connecting blow after blow. They were moving so fast that only the Satans could watch the movements. How did he get that fast? Akino muttered fearfully. No one had an answer. They were witnessing Issei Hyoudou true power, and a part of them knew he wasn't using everything he had. No, that was going to be saved for them, and their time was coming. It was coming very soon. Soon indeed. Boosta. They all turned their attention to the battle as they heard the command. They watched as Issei charged again, but this time they could see him. They were wondering what was going on. They knew he had more speed in him that he could use, but he was purposefully slowing himself down. Why? They thought quickly. Great Red noticed it too. He knew it wasn't fatigue. No, it was something the boy cooked up and was planning, but what? He needed to find out before the boy executed his plan and got the drop on him. Great Red charged with an energized fist. Issei put up a guard and blocked it. Why didn't he dodge it? He has speed and he probably saw it coming, Seraphal asked aloud. No one had no idea as to what he was doing. Boosta. Ajuka started to think about what he could be doing. He's obviously stalling for something, but what? He asked aloud. No one had an answer, so they just turned their attention to the battle as it raged on. Issei ducked a kick that was sent at him. He delivered a swift uppercut to Great Red and sent him flying up. Great Red stopped himself in midair and took a look at Issei. He was baiting him for some reason. Boosta. Great Red shook off his thoughts and charged again. He quickly vanished from sight and appeared before Issei and delivered a sucker punch to his gut. He went to kick him back, but Issei caught it fairly easily. Great Red was surprised once again as Issei spun around and threw him back, but Great Red wasn't done. He quickly got back up and sped towards Issei with his fist reeled back. Issei knew he had no choice but to put an equal amount of force in his punch this time. He was planning something and it was hard to adapt in mid-battle. He had no choice as he charged forwards as well. Suddenly, to his surprise, his fist covered with black energy. It was the same energy from the sphere of annihilation. Bahamut, what is happening? He asked in his head. He looked at the energy covering his fist as he charged on to meet Great Red. The sphere of annihilation is made up of the purest energy in you. As such, it's very volatile and destructive as any amount of energy that is pulled from the source. It seems when you came out of the dragon form, you gained the ability to manipulate it freely. It can now be used in more ways than just a single sphere, Bahamut explained. Issei hummed and nodded to himself. What he says is very true. Energy is very malleable. Once your body learns how to produce it on its own, it spreads like a wildfire. As such, it creates new possibilities with it. This is something you must learn to adapt to your own abilities and techniques due to the fact the energy is very destructive, Drake added. Issei nodded to himself as he heard his dragons. He knew this was something he'd have to delve deeper into, but there was a bigger problem at the moment. With that in his head, he turned his attention towards Great Red, who was nearing closer and closer. Soon a burst of wind exploded as their fists met. Great Red seemed surprised as he looked at the black energy covering Issei's arm. The devils watching the battle noticed it too. What is that covering him? Seraphal asked. Zerzech looked at it for a moment. It's energy of the purest form, directly pulled from the source, he said. Everyone gasped as they realized what it was. Making it very volatile and destructive, Ajuka said. Zerzech nodded. It seemed the boy was growing in strength every moment. Great Red noticed his energy was being obliterated as it clashed with the black energy. So you've learned how to use energy in its purest state right from the source, huh? Makes it a very deadly weapon if used right. A truly terrifying thing to behold, Great Red mused. Boosta. Suddenly the energy that covered Issei flared like it was gasoline being lit on fire. Issei kneed Great Red and charged a small crimson ball of energy and punched it. Dragon Shot. Everyone watched as the crimson shot was launched at the Apocalypse Dragon. He was able to put a guard up and block it in time, but noticed Issei disappearing. It was already too late as he felt his presence behind him. Explosion. With that single word, the whole area shook like a bomb had gone off. Everyone now understood what Issei was doing earlier and why he was stalling. He was boosting purposefully and waiting for an opening to use explosion to deal a ton of damage. Great Red was sent flying as he said that word. He smirked to himself knowing this boy was a truly powerful being, but he knew now that with explosion he had a window to clinch this. Reset. Everyone watched as Issei's power dropped significantly. Great Red suddenly got up and walked forwards towards Issei, who was panting from his use of the boosted gear. Everyone knew this fight was coming to a close, but they didn't know who would win. They thought Great Red would win, but they knew Issei wasn't going to go down that easily. They stared at the two figures as they just stared at each other, neither one of them making a sound or making a move. This battle was about to be finished soon, and the results would shock everyone. The final part of their battle was starting. Chapter 17, The Battle That Shook the World Finale. The silence was met with bated breath as everyone watched the two colossal powerhouses stare at each other. They knew this battle was about to be ended. However, they didn't know what would become of it. If they did, they would run to the hills from the sheer power and determination that was about to be unleashed for the world to see in all its glory. They would realize they were ants compared to these monsters. Great Red and Issei Hyoudou, two fighters that truly made a battle for the ages. It was in its final legs as both of them stared each in the eyes. Great Red smirked as he saw his opponent. They both pushed each other farther than before. I must say I'm impressed you made me use most of my power. Now I must say it's time to finish this. It was a valiant effort indeed, he said aloud. Everyone watched as Great Red covered himself in a red glow and charged at Issei. Issei didn't even care and charged forwards without hesitation. He didn't care about the risks of further damaging his body beyond repair. It didn't matter one bit to him. Great Red saw this and was astonished. What drove him this far? He wondered, dumbstruck. This boy was something else. Something else indeed. Fists clashed again as bursts of piercing winds erupted from the source. The bystanders could only watch as both of them clashed in a battle of pure strength, determination, and will. They wondered how much longer it would last. Great Red quickly delivered a kick to his ribs and followed it up by grabbing his arm and hurling him across the deserted piece of underworld that became their battlefield. He watched as Issei got back up like it was nothing. He could tell he wasn't done. Great Red's window was closing too. It was a time limit before Issei could start to boost again. However, he looked to the boy to see his feet covered in the black energy. He rose an eyebrow as he watched an explosion that sent Issei flying towards him at blinding speeds. Great Red widened his eyes as he realized what he did. Issei used the power of the pure energy to propel him towards his opponent. Great Red didn't even have time to think as he was elbowed in the face and kicked with a ton of force, thus knocking him back. Great Red stood back up and looked his opponent in the eye. Tell me, Issei Hyoudou, what pushes you forwards? What causes this insane amount of willpower you have? What drives you to throw caution to the wind and follow what you want to the ends of the world? Great Red shouted. Issei looked at him directly. He scoffed. You want to know what makes me like this? What is my driving factor? He said in a deadly quiet voice. Great Red knew something was coming, and it was going to be bigger than anything they saw. It is the simple fact that I wanted to live a life where I was happy. I don't want this endless cycle of lies and deceit to go on anymore. After all that has happened, nothing has changed for my goals. I swore on that fateful day in purgatory that I would see the world changed by very hands. Even if it takes me 1,000 years, that goal will come true. Nothing will stand in my way, he shouted aloud. Everyone was shocked as the very ground started to vibrate and crack. An earthquake was being caused. Everyone looked to the skies to see dark clouds forming. A few moments later, a ton of lightning strikes were flashing non-stop. It was clearly something caused by Issei. Issei looked around as the whole area was being thrashed around. He wondered what this was. It's called Reign of Annihilation. It's an ability that is activate upon emotion. It causes massive damage to the area around you and to anyone who may be near you, Bahamut explained. Issei nodded and looked at his opponent, sizing him up. He knew this fight was going to be tough, but he wasn't going down easily. He'd be damned if he went the path of least resistance. No, it was time to give it all or nothing. With a deafening roar, Issei's body charged with his black energy as he charged towards Great Red. Great Red was clearly shocked that the boy could still call upon such power. He knew it was only a matter of time before he could boost once again. Great Red charged forwards as well. Great Red's fist met Issei's elbow as he swung it. Issei quickly delivered a sucker punch to his gut. Everyone was watching in horror. This was something akin to the entity of death walking among his subjects. It was truly frightening to see the both of them release a gigantic amount of power like this. Seraphal looked in fear as both beings clashed over and over again. How Rias muttered. No one had any words. Akino looked at the man she used to know. It was their fault and they were going to pay the ultimate price for their mistakes. What do we do? She asked aloud numbly. No one had any words. This was the future they got. They didn't know it would turn out like this. They now understood how hopeless it was against him. Just his sheer determination made his power even more frightening. It would make him deliver on his promise. Issei was starting to feel the fatigue set in. He should have known this would happen. This was a battle he was forced to use most, if not all of his power. It only made the determination in his eyes more stronger. The will was burning bright in the darkest night. That was something to be said. Great Red knew this kid would do what he said. He wouldn't stop for anyone in his way and would use everything he had and pull out every single fucking stop to accomplish just that. The window was closed though. Issei stood up and took a deep breath. Boosta. As Issei boosted, he felt the power rush to him, though he knew this was going to be the final push. After a few more boosts, it would be the end of the line. He wouldn't be able to boost anymore without seriously damaging himself beyond repair. Great Red widened his eyes and chuckled. This was a good fight. With no hesitation, they both charged again. It was a true battle of wills. Blade. Great Red hesitated for a bit. He was now forcing Issei to use everything he had. The Scalon would still affect him a bit. It was a Dragon Slayer sword after all. Issei was given a slight advantage now. However, the fact remained that this battle was nearing the end and both of them were nearly running on empty. Great Red admitted it to himself. He felt fatigued too. This was one hell of a battle that he didn't expect at all. It was truly something to behold, the power this boy had, and it kept surprising him time and time again. Great Red's fist met the flat of the blade as Issei blocked with it. Great Red was too late in noticing a kick reeled back, covered in energy. With a sharp kick aimed at the ribs, Great Red stumbled back. Issei didn't even give him time to recover and went to deliver a follow-up punch. However, Great Red wasn't going to go down that easy. Issei's fist met his hand as Great Red grabbed it and delivered a punch to his gut. Issei, you need to finish it fast. You're not going to be able to stand a few more punches like that. You need to do something fast, D-Drake roared in his head. Issei found himself drawing a blank. They both were going at each other with everything they had and nothing happened. So how was he able to finish it quickly when nothing was giving? Nothing seemed to make each other stay down. Bahamut realized this and knew there was something he could do. It was a final gambit of sorts. Reason being the risks were dangerously high. Issei could lose his life if he tried what he was thinking at this point. Already exhausted with energy made anything very dangerous to try. There might be something you could do, however it is extremely dangerous and could very well kill you. The best case scenario is severe internal damage and extreme loss of lifespan. If we do this, it will have to be an all or nothing effort, Bahamut said suddenly. Issei's eyebrows raised in confusion. What was he getting at? He quickly thought, alarmed. However, he knew if there was a way for him to win, the consequences be damned. He would try anything at this point. He couldn't fail now, not when he already came this far. However, a part of him was worried about the outcome, that is, if he followed what Bahamut said they could do. "What is it?" he asked quickly. Great Red noticed his silence and figured something was about to happen once again. He smirked, knowing this boy was definitely something else. If and when he were to go to war, they wouldn't stand a chance against him. Dragon knew what Bahamut was suggesting. He didn't like it very much, though. If he does that, there's no telling how much damage he could do to himself. It's too risky, he said. Bahamut snorted and replied back. Even so, what happens if he doesn't try? It was all for nothing. At least this way he might have a chance, Bahamut countered. Issei was starting to get annoyed. He needed to know, and quickly. "What is it that I can do to have a chance at ending this?" he shouted in his head. Both dragons were silent. Bahamut spoke up shortly afterwards. "You have heard of it. It's called the Juggernaut Drive. It temporarily removes the seal on our power. Doing so allows you to tap into our power, and with it you can overcome him and end it. However, the risks are very big this time around. You are literally running on fumes. Your energy isn't going to last much longer. If you do the Juggernaut Drive, you only have a small amount of time to end it," Bahamut explained. Issei's eye widened. Doing that was definitely an all-or-nothing situation indeed. He thought about it for a good amount of time and decided. "Fuck it. Let's do it," he said softly. "All or nothing indeed." Bahamut gave a grunt and they began. Great Red knew something was going on when Issei stood still and looked at him impassively. "I who is about to awaken," the first line came out. A blast of blood-red energy flooded the area that was being used as a battlefield. Great Red's eyes widened as he heard the first sentence. He started to sweat as he now understood what Issei was doing. Great Red couldn't understand why, though. He must have known the risks. So why, he thought odd. "Am the Dragon of Annihilation who has risen past the power of domination," the second line came out. Everyone quickly shielded themselves from the power Issei was unleashing. All four Satans were using all their power in a barrier to protect themselves. Great Red grunted as he felt the pressure he was feeling from Issei. "I am the infinite and I destroy the dream," the third line came out. Great Red felt the power as Issei's body started to grow in size. Suddenly, two gigantic, sleek gray and blood-red wings came out of his back. They were even bigger than before. The energy that was gathering around Issei was enormous and growing by the second. "I shall become Crimson Dragon of Annihilation," the fourth line rang out for all to hear. Issei's body suddenly grew to its full size as the chant was almost done. Great Red saw no choice and instantly went into his full form, powering up as much as he could. He prepared to go all out against the monster that this boy was. "And I will drag you to the depths of your grave." Those words struck fear into the bystanders as they watched. Great Red rose to the height that the behemoth stood. It was at least 100 feet tall. This thing was a monster indeed. "Annihilation Drive," the final line was shouted. With those two words, an explosion rocked the underworld as the whole area was being destroyed by the beast's energy. 5 minutes later, the shaking stopped and everyone got a look at what was left of the area. It was barren. Not a single speck of life was seen. Great Red didn't even have any chance. This beast's power was something else. Something even the apocalypse dragon wouldn't want to face. It was a nightmare for him. Being tossed around like a ragdoll was enough for him to get serious. He used his tail and grabbed it and hurled it into the ground, causing a gigantic crater to form where the beast landed. However, Great Red wasn't done yet. He quickly poured a ton of energy into a single ball and fired it off at the ground, intent on destroying the abomination. However, the energy blast stopped a few feet from the ground. It was suddenly punched out of the way as the beast stood up and roared to the heavens. Suddenly, a massive torrent of black energy shot out of the beast's mouth as it came towards Great Red. He barely had enough time to roll out of the way, but he didn't come out unscathed. No, a part of his wing was caught in the blast, and it took it head-on. He started to lose flight fast. He crashed into the ground soon after. He looked up to see the beast looking at him stoically. He knew this was the end. Suddenly his energy rose as the beast started to boost. Everyone saw it and wondered how it was possible. Little did they know that both the dragon's power merged and produced a new form. It was the same for his balance breaker. Great Red looked up in horror as the chest of the beast started to get thick with green and blood-red energy. He knew what was coming. With no choice, he summoned every last ounce of his power into an energy blast. When the energy that was being gathered by the beast seemed to peak, he heard the words he dreaded. "Annihilation Smasher," the beast roared. The torrent of energy shot out like a torpedo, and Great Red pushed every last ounce of his power in a last-ditch effort and fired off his own energy blast. Both of the energies clashed as they met head-on. They honestly lasted longer than anyone thought they would. Suddenly, Great Red's energy blast started to get overpowered quickly as it finally blew up, and the torrent of green and red energy was sent forwards. However, it was redirected by Great Red's last effort. Everyone was silent as the torrent of energy exploded like a nuclear bomb. They all looked to see both beings staying still. Great Red had nothing left he could use, and his energy was completely gone. Suddenly the beast started to move, but it stopped quickly afterwards. The Annihilation Drive started to wear off as the armor started to vanish, leaving an unconscious Issei Hyoudou. It was a true last-ditch effort on his part, and it worked. Great Red went into his human form and walked over to the unconscious boy with whatever energy he had left. He struggled walking over to him too. He was that tired from the battle. Suddenly flashes of energy appeared behind him. He smirked as he saw the four Satans along with everyone else. They obviously, though they could take Issei now that he was wasted of his energy. "What do you devils want?" he sneered. Zerzech seemed to recover the quickest and spoke up. "We're here for that criminal. He must pay for what he has done," he said. Great Red snorted, then laughed aloud. "You really think I would let you come in after our battle and take him without any difficulty? Please, you devils know now that his power is crazy. Prepare yourselves. He has proven to me he is worthy and that his determination is stronger than anything I've seen. Enjoy what little time you have left on this planet." He laughed loudly after speaking up. Everyone tensed as they watched him pick up the body, and suddenly he vanished in a red glow, leaving a horrified group of devils. They had no idea what was coming. It was coming soon too. Chapter 18: The Aftermath. Deep in a forest stood a figure who himself was tired as fuck. The battle had worn him out that much as well. He quickly sat Issei down by a tree and sat down to take a breath. He truly hadn't expected that kid to do that much damage. "Damn kids, you sure are something, aren't you?" Great Red muttered. Suddenly 2 lights appeared on both of Issei's hands. "The Apocalypse Dragon, what do you think of our host?" Bahamut asked. Great Red snorted at the Annihilation Dragon. He would ask that after the battle, wouldn't he? He quickly thought. The kid's got some serious balls. I could feel the raw determination rolling off of him. The kid has the power to change the world forever. That is the truth, he said. D-Drake chuckled and made himself known. It's amazing that after all that happened to him, he is still able to go through every day like nothing happened, he added. Great Red started to listen more intently as Bahamut spoke up. That's thanks to all of the people who embraced him as Issei Hyoudou and not a tool to be used. That's the one thing those devils failed to miss, he added. Suddenly everyone was interrupted as Issei Hyoudou himself awoke, spitting blood as he sat up. He was clearly in a serious condition. He couldn't see very well as everything was blurry and dizzy. As his vision cleared, the first thing he saw was a smirking Great Red. Well, speak of the devil, he joked. As Issei finally got his bearings back, he looked around the area to see they were no longer in the underworld. He finally looked up to Great Red in disbelief. Gee, Great Red, he mumbled out. He could barely speak as well. That was one hell of a battle, kid. You've proven your determination to me. You have my support in this war, Great Red said. Issei understood him fairly easy. He was still a little dizzy and out of the place. "How are you feeling?" Dragon asked suddenly. Issei blinked and coughed up a bit more blood. "Like my insides have been blended and boiled to temperatures hotter than lava," he managed out. That earned a chuckle from Great Red. "That was the risk of the Annihilation Drive. It paid off though," Bahamut said suddenly. Suddenly Great Red put his hand on Issei's shoulder and he then glowed a golden color. Issei looked to him in confusion as he explained. "I shared a bit of my energy to help speed along your healing. It's not much, but it will help you for now," he explained. Issei felt a little bit better and was able to stand up and lean against the tree he was sitting by. "So what's next?" Dragon suddenly asked. Issei looked in thought as everyone waited for his answer. "It's time. We will begin the final preparations and strike afterwards. This has been coming for a while and we need to do it as soon as we can. I have the perfect spot to go for first," he said strongly. They all listened closely as he continued to explain. "The dragon's territory in the underworld, since the underworld will most likely be the battlefield for the most of it. We should use that as our base of operations now," he said. They were surprised quickly as they heard him. Great Red smirked, seeing the determination shining through Issei's eyes. "The devils won't know what hit them. Then we should gather the rest of them and get it done as soon as we can, before the factions start to mobilize even more themselves," Dragon added. Issei nodded and stood up straight. "Well, let's go introduce them to our new teammate," he said with a grin. Great Red adopted the same grin. "Try not to scare them into shitting their pants, Great Red," Bahamut added with a chuckle. Great Red laughed at hearing that. "No promises," he said. Issei chuckled and put his hand on Great Red's shoulder and they both entered a magic circle. Vanishing from the forest soon after, they set off to prepare the group for the final push. Scene break: Underworld. Back in the underworld, shortly after Great Red left with Issei, stood all the devils who witnessed the battle. They were shell-shocked. They had no idea what to do now. The area where their fight took place was nothing but a wasteland now, a testament to how much they were ants compared to Issei and his group. "What do we do?" Rias asked weakly. Silence was met after her question. No one had any words to say. "All we can do is move forwards and prepare for the worst. We need to be ready at a moment's notice. However, with their fight, Issei will most likely be out of commission for a week at least. That gives us a window," Serafal said aloud. Surzech nodded numbly before anyone else could speak up. It suddenly got a lot darker and they felt a presence with power of a god. They turned to see Offeyes and Cao Cao. "What happened here?" Anyone could feel the power unleashed, Cao Cao asked while looking at the wasteland. Offeyes was silent as she looked across the barren area. "This power was god class, maybe more. This is the signs of a gigantic battle between Great Red and him. I didn't think that boy would try to recruit that dragon," she said quickly. Everyone wondered what she meant by that. "Offeyes, what do you mean?" Serafal asked. Offeyes looked at Serafal for a moment before speaking up again. "Great Red is called the Apocalypse Dragon for a reason. There are only 3 beings with that kind of power. Well, there's 4 now. Issei Hyoudou has just reached power higher than what you can imagine," she started. Surzech was interested and spoke up. "You said 3 beings. I'm assuming you and Great Red are 2 of them, and if Issei is the new one, who is the other?" he asked. Offeyes looked at him for a moment. "Trihexa 666, the apocalyptic beast, the very monster the god of the Bible sealed away many eons ago," she said softly. They were shocked at hearing that. Cao Cao smirked and spoke up. "The beast is seal away, no need to wet your pants. What Offeyes is saying is gather every ounce of power you have. You're going to be facing 2 beings on the Trihexa's level. If you don't, you'll be cannon fodder," he said. Everyone was silent after hearing that. What was coming, they all thought quickly. "Serafal, you address the council. I'm going to go around and make sure our allies are ready. War is finally nearing," Surzech said suddenly. Seraphal nodded and disappeared in her own magic circle. It was time. Surzets looked at his sister and her peerage. You best be ready to face whatever Issei is going to throw at us. He won't hold back, so we can't either. He will most definitely come for you with intent to kill, he said seriously. They all gulped then nodded hesitantly. The war was just on the horizon. Time was counting down quickly. Scene break with Issei and Great Red. The two of them reappeared outside the mansion. Great Red looked up at the building and chuckled. So this is where you live, he joked. Issei just chuckled. Well, it was better than a run-down church. I think the others would prefer this better than what I lived in before, he said. Great Red shook his head as Issei continued to chuckle. Word of advice, they won't take it well, Issei said suddenly. Great Red only laughed harder. I wasn't counting on it, he said quickly. Issei nodded and they trudged to the door and opened it up. That was when the bomb went off. The first person to see them was Cockabeel, whose jaw dropped to the floor in an instant. Donasik was coming down the stairs when he saw them and he nearly fell right on the ground. Issei, Cockabeel asked in disbelief. Issei only nodded numbly. Cockabeel looked at the newcomer and instantly his eyes widened in fear. You're Great Red, right? He asked quickly. Issei chuckled as Great Red gave a toothy grin. Cockabeel gulped and spoke up. Damn, that would be a fight I would like to see, he said. Issei shook his head. You just might see it soon enough, we're coming closer to it, Issei said suddenly. Cockabeel's eyes widened. You mean it's starting soon? He asked. Issei nodded numbly. Before Cockabeel or anyone else could say anything, a screech was heard. Issei, it was Rainier and Calawarner. Before Issei knew it, he was groaning in pain from being tackled by the two girls. How are you? Rainier asked worriedly. Issei only chuckled and sat up. I'm fine, just a little sore, he said. Suddenly a green light appeared, and with it Drake spoke up. A little sore? Ha, you're lucky if you don't have serious internal damage. Drake snorted loudly. Rainier glared at him along with Calawarner. Issei flinched behind the looks of the women. What does he mean? Kuroka suddenly asked as she stepped up. Donasik watched silently as he held back a laugh at Issei getting scorned by them. Just a battle that made the region they were fighting in barren of any life, Bahamut added amused. Great Red smirked and held back a chuckle at how the women, who were definitely smitten with Issei, were scorning him for fighting recklessly. Then that's, Calawarner stuttered while pointing at the new face. Great Red only smirked and stepped up. Allow me to introduce myself, Great Red the Apocalypse Dragon, he gave a toothy grin. Most of them gulped at the power he let out. Tiamat, who was sitting idly by the counter, decided to speak up. So what did your battle entail, Issei? She asked seriously. Issei rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and began to speak. It started out in the dimensional gap, which was shortly transferred to the underworld. After the devils showed up to see the commotion, my final stage in evolution happened and I went into a full dragon form shortly after returning to my human form. The battle then made its way into the final stages and I had to use something risky to finish it in the end, he explained. Rainier narrowed her eyes at the end of his statement. What was risky? She asked. Issei gulped as she stepped closer. The Juggernaut Drive, more like Bahamut's drive. It turned me into a beast as Great Red couldn't handle the ferocity of it, Issei said. Great Red started to speak up. It's more like a monster. I wouldn't dare fight that thing again. I could tell you weren't in full control, he said suddenly. Issei shook his head and spoke again. Enough of that, now it is time to address what will be happening soon, he said suddenly. Everyone listened intently as he began again. After I heal up, we are going to take the dragon's territory in the underworld. Since the war will most likely be fought mostly there, it will be a base of operations for us. The clock is ticking and we are going to move soon, he said loudly. Everyone's eyes widened. It was time. The dragon's territory, a fitting place for the group, Tiamat muttered. Issei nodded. So this is it, get ready with whatever you have. Before we set out, I will go to our allies and inform them of what's to come. I have no doubt the factions are already mobilizing after witnessing our battle. Great Red stepped up suddenly. As I am now a part of the group, I will inform you of what's to come. Issei has said that the factions are mobilizing. Yes, that is true. However, there is more to it than that. They have gained some very powerful allies. The Norse is one of them, Offai's the infinite dragon god, and the Chaos Brigade is another, Great Red said suddenly. Issei chuckled at their shocked faces. Don't be afraid of what's to come. With you guys already becoming dragons, your power is something on its own level. It was the essence made from Bahamut himself. Your power is enough to take on them, he said suddenly. Everyone calmed down after that and gave grins. This was going to be a long time coming. I assume you want them to yourself, Cockabeel said with a grin. Issei chuckled darkly. Rias and her peerage are mine. This will be fun, he said loudly. Everyone nodded and chuckled. Great Red looked at Issei and chuckled. I wouldn't want to be them right about now, he muttered. Everyone laughed as Issei chuckled too. The clock was ticking. The dawn of war was coming. Soon. Chapter 19, Dawn of War PT1. Issei found himself sitting downstairs early in the morning. He was thinking quite a lot about the next few days and what they would entail. He knew the clock was counting down and he needed to make a move quickly before they got the upper hand and made their move. Since he knew without a doubt the majority of the war would take place in the underworld, he would see the dragon territory in his hands soon enough. He figured to give the group the day off to rest and gather what they needed. Then they would claim the territory and use it as a base. He knew that would be easy, however, the moment he did it. That would be the final push and it would start. The war, it was closer every damn day. Suddenly he heard a couple footsteps behind him and looked to see Donesik and Cockabeel just waking up. They both quickly sat down on the couch next to him. So what's up, boss? Donesik asked suddenly. Issei rolled his eyes and chuckled. He would ask it like that. Donesik was the laid-back one after all in his opinion. What are you thinking about? Cockabeel asked. Issei sighed and began to speak. The war will no doubt be started the moment we enter the dragon's territory, and I have yet to gain all my strength back from that fight, so I still need to rest some more. However, it's coming closer and closer, he said. Cockabeel huffed as he heard that, which drew the attention of both males in the room with him. They wondered what he had in his mind. Then we need to start strategizing, he said quickly. Issei raised an eyebrow and spoke up. What do you mean? We already have the plan to go take over the dragon's territory, he asked confused. Cockabeel just shook his head. Issei might be their leader. However, he was still a kid in some senses. Sure, he was about the age of an adult. However, he was forced to grow up quickly and in one of the most harshest ways. Even Cockabeel didn't wish something that much emotional and mental effects on a person. To be betrayed by people you held in such high regards was something very life-altering. So he expected the boy to have some gaps in his mental thinking. However, that didn't mean anything to him. He would learn in due time with people to help him. That is true that we already have that figured out, but what else? Tell me, in any war, whether it's a small skirmish or some of the world's most biggest wars, human and supernatural alike, what has always decided the victor? He asked suddenly. Both of them were taken for a loop at his statement. It was obvious to Issei that there was still quite a bit he needed to learn about. Donesik didn't expect this out of Cockabeel, but he wondered where it was going. Seeing no answers or responses, Cockabeel spoke up. Luck has nothing to do with who comes out on top. No one has the luxury of fate being on their side. Every single war has one thing in common: it had masterminds behind the efforts. They say history decides the victors. That is true in a sense. Due to the fact they had what it took to win, even the humans have realized this fact. War isn't a game, it's life and death, and we need to plan for it, he explained. Issei chuckled and looked seriously at Cockabeel for a moment. Then, I am appointing you as the head strategic and intel specialist for this effort, he said simply. Cockabeel chuckled but nonetheless nodded. Very well, what do we know exactly about our enemies? He started. Issei wondered what he meant by that. Donasik had the same thought. Suddenly, a new voice entered the conversation. If in terms of strength they are average, if you mean numbers, they have that advantage by a long shot. The Norse, angels, devils, fallen and offis and the Chaos Brigade is what we are up against. However, we have raw strength on our side. It was Great Red. Cockabill was silent as he heard it and let it digest. Damn, it's going to be a full battleground of carnage and chaos. We need a way to keep in contact with each other, or at least a way to let us know each other's positions. It's definitely going to be a big one. Some of them will be a challenge, some enemies will be in the top 10 strongest list. Offai's Odin Thor, not to mention the Chaos Brigade's versatile arsenal, Cao Cao and his spear will be a tough match. It will no doubt be a tough one, he said finally. Donasik scoffed and spoke up. That's an understatement and you know it. We all are strong, sure, but you're forgetting the years of experiences these beings have. Not to mention the others, Satans, archangels, cadre classes and leaders among the factions all have enormous amounts of power, he said quickly. Issei sighed and leaned back. Donasik was right. It was time for everyone to train and push farther. Now about the dragon's territory, Issei said suddenly. Everyone turned to him as he started again. The dragon's territory in the underworld is home to Tannon, who is also a member of Mephistopheles' peerage. So the moment we step foot in the territory and he senses us, it will be seen as us making the first move, and he will no doubt inform his master, in turn would inform Surzech of our takeover, and then no doubt they will mobilize, he explained. Donasik scoffed at hearing that. That's an understatement. It will be a panic the moment we arrive. We step foot in it, it's already an act of war. No doubt they will arrive shortly after, he said quickly. Issei laughed and spoke up. We have plenty of power. Satan-class beings can be held off enough until one or more of us can join in. Watch for Surzech or any other beings. Do not underestimate your opponent. Especially the Chaos Brigade. Offis will know where you are most likely, he said. Everyone looked at him as he started to speak again. I will obviously need a few days to get back to strength. No doubt I nearly killed myself in that fight. Then we'll head to the underworld. I know the territory well. I actually trained with Tannon before. No doubt he will try to defend it, he continued. Cockabill looked at him for a moment. What's the terrain like? He asked suddenly. Issei leaned back and spoke. Mountains, streams, harsh training spots. The Mrbabybornree estate was affected in the fight. I don't know how damaged it is though, he said quickly. Cockabill shrugged and spoke. We might want to booby-trap the area around our base. There might be a bunker somewhere nearby the estate for supplies. No way they wouldn't have one for emergencies, he said quickly. Everyone looked at him for a moment. Makes sense, they rich as hell, no telling where it would be, he replied. Everyone looked at each other for a moment. In the meantime, focus on getting ready and honing your skills. You're going to need to be at your best when we leave, Issei said suddenly. Everyone nodded and started to do their own things. Issei knew it was at least a week until he would be at full strength, but it was more long-term damage he was worried about. Bahamut, D-Drags, give the full rundown. How bad did the Juggernaut Drive affect me? He suddenly asked the dragons in his head. He waited for a response. It was a few moments later when Bahamut spoke up. You broke 3 ribs, a wrist, all in that transformation as a first. Secondly, your life force is severely shortened. A second transformation could be fatal if you used it as a last resort. You were lucky to come out this way as a result, he said. Issei sighed before speaking up. He had a question for them. How do I increase the control of my abilities? He asked. Both of them were silent after hearing that. Physical strength and endurance will help you be able to use the boosted gear longer. The other abilities are dependent on you and the amount of power you put in them, D-Drag said. Issei leaned back as he heard him. Your other abilities are dependent on emotion. Armageddon's Call is activated upon rage along with Reign of Annihilation. Controlling your emotions well enough might grant some better control over it, Bahamut said suddenly. Issei nodded and sat up. I guess I'll just work through it, he thought quickly. He wondered how the next week or so would play out. Scene break, Underworld. In Lilith, Surzech currently awaited Azazel, who was arriving soon. It wasn't that long until the fallen angel walked through the door. Surzech had a serious face as they began. "I heard about the fight and the damage it caused," Azazel said suddenly. Surzech nodded and began to speak up. "It was big. 3/4 of the Grimoire territory is destroyed from the blasts. It's obvious Hyoudou is becoming a real threat. After this, I have to meet with Seraphal and the elders so we can begin the final preparations," he said. Azazel nodded and spoke up. "It seems Penemu had defected to his side. We only got a small bit before she did," Azazel said suddenly. Surzech looked at him then sighed. "What do you know?" he asked suddenly. Azazel sighed and sat down. "Their base is currently Volley's mansion. That's where they're staying. Volley's team with Issei's group and Great Red. It seems they are gathering more and more. I have a feeling something is coming soon," he said. Surzech looked at Azazel curiously as he spoke. "What do you mean?" he asked quickly. Azazel looked at him as he spoke. "It's been a few days since his fight with Great Red and it's quiet. No one has left the mansion yet. Either Hyoudou is training more, which I doubt that. He just beat Great Red, so I highly doubt that he needs to get stronger. I think they are also beginning their final preparations and will strike soon," he said. Surzech sighed and looked up. "It seems I'll be taking a pit stop to Asgard to inform Odin that the time is soon. It seems this is really it, huh? The countdown is only getting shorter," he said softly. Azazel nodded and spoke up. "You're right, the Grigori doing its final preparations too. This war will be a big one. No doubt the underworld is going to take a lot of damage because of it," he said. Surzech sighed and looked at him. "There's nothing we can really do about it. That's the risk of these things," he said simply. Azazel nodded and stood up. "I'll keep you informed about any new reports or things that come up," he said. Surzech nodded and watched as Azazel disappeared into a magic circle, leaving him alone. He knew what was next, the meeting with Seraphal. Before he knew it, he was already on his way towards her office. He just wanted to get it done with already. The moment Seraphal saw Surzech, she knew it was time to get serious, and by the look on his face, it was true for him as well. "So let's get started," he said quickly. She nodded and began. "The Council of Elders is waiting for us," she said. He nodded and they both disappeared in a magic circle and reappeared in a large room filled with heads of the clans. Everyone of importance was there. It was time to get down to business. "So what are your guys' plans?" an elder asked suddenly. Surzech stepped forward as he addressed them. "We have allies with the Norse, fallen angels and angels. The whole war will most likely be fought in the underworld, so we have that advantage. It is time to start gathering resources and start building our numbers," he said loudly. Seraphal nodded to his statement and began to speak. "He is right. Hyoudou has become a bigger threat than ever. We think he is close to being ready to strike. We need to be ready for it. Everyone needs to be prepared. Every other faction is preparing for war, and we must do the same," she said loudly. All the elders looked around, as if deciding on something. "It is time, as you said. Our clans will support this war effort," many of them said loudly. Surzech smiled. He knew they had just gotten that part done. "Next line of business, we have some information about Hyoudou," he said loudly. Seraphal looked at curiously. "What kind of information?" she asked confused. Everyone else in the room wanted to know as well. "We know where their base is, however, with his group being there. It's defended very well. Also, Azazel had Penemu, one of his subordinates, spy on him for us. However, she has defected to his side. As of now, Issei Hyoudou is becoming very powerful as we speak. That's why we believe he will strike soon," he said loudly. Seraphal was shocked along with the rest of the elders in the room. It seemed Hyoudou was more resourceful than they thought originally. "So it's really coming," Seraphal muttered to herself. Surzech sighed as he heard her soft voice. "Yes, it is. However, we have no choice but to fight," he said. Everyone looked at him as he continued to speak. We also believe that with the fight he had with Great Red, he is still resting to get his strength back. It seems we have a few days at least until we can expect him, he said suddenly. Zarafal shook her head and spoke. I never hoped it would come to this, okay? I'll start notifying the citizens. This situation could call for martial law, though, Zarafal said suddenly. Zurzech nodded and spoke up. You're right, the panic will be bad enough. Now faced with an ultimatum will be the final push. I'm going to visit Odin and the Norse gods to tell them what is coming, he said quickly. Everyone was silent in the room. Martial law is a given in these types of situations. It is inevitable, a new voice said. Everyone turned around to see Azazel. What is this filth doing here? A elder screeched. Zurzech put his hand up to silence the room. Azazel, what is the meaning for disturbing this meeting? He asked quickly. Azazel sighed and spoke up. We have some new info about Hyoudou. I think you'll want to hear it, he said quickly. Everyone turned to him as he spoke again. Hyoudou is on the move, he started. Everyone looked at him seriously. What is he doing? Zarafal asked quickly. Azazel sighed and explained. He shortly left the mansion and proceeded to fly towards Kyoto, the territory of the Yokai, he said quickly. A few gasps and shocks were the result of that statement. So he's allied with Yasaka and the Yaokais. Anything else? Zurzech asked quickly. Azazel shook his head. Zurzech nodded and sighed. Thank you. It seems the fact that it is starting soon is only concreted more by your information. Very well, let it be known we will be going to war very soon, Zurzech said loudly. The room was silent. Zarafal looked around and spoke up. Zurzech is right, you must prepare for the worst, she said. The council nodded and watched as the three of them disappeared into their own magic circles. It was time. The war was starting soon. Chapter 20, Dawn of War PT2. Issei knew the time was coming, and it was coming soon. As he flew towards Kyoto to prepare Yasaka for what was to come, he wondered how it would all play out. However, he had no doubt in his mind that he would be victorious. He would have the life he wanted, and not the one he was living under an illusion. Before he knew it, he was already sitting in Yasaka's office. So why have you come here so soon after the last time? She asked quickly. She wasn't expecting him at all, however, by his expression. She knew it was serious and he was here for a reason. Issei sighed as he began to explain it to her. The war will most likely be starting soon. Soon my group will be ready to move. We have decided to make a base in the underworld, in the dragon's territory to be specific. We also have no doubt that the moment we enter the territory that Tannon will try to intercept us. If he is defeated, no doubt Mephistopheles will know about it and notify Zurzech. Then it will start, he explained. Yasaka sighed after hearing him. Do you have an exact day when you will be leaving? She asked suddenly. Issei put his hand on his chin as he thought about her question. In truth, the battle with Great Red still left some soreness and tiredness, and it hadn't faded yet, so it might a few days to a week. However, he needed to give her an answer. I'd say 3-4 days. I'll send a messenger before we leave so that you can make appropriate preparations, he said. Yasaka nodded and hummed. She was about to speak up when a large magic circle appeared in the room. Yasaka seemed to be a bit surprised to see it, however, Issei knew the symbol. It was the Shinto gods. Soon Susanoo, Amaterasu, and Tsukuyomi appeared. Yasaka suddenly spoke to them as they appeared. I thought you guys weren't coming till later, she asked. Amaterasu instantly noticed Issei and smiled. It seems you have a guest, Yasaka, and we decided to come a bit earlier this time, she said happily. Yasaka rolled her eyes at Amaterasu's usual bubbly personality. Issei looked over the two other gods in the room. Tsukuyomi eyed him a bit wearily. However, Issei could feel that he didn't think badly about him. When he looked at Susanoo, however, that was a different case. Susanoo looked at him like a snob, like he was someone more important. So this is the brat that's taking it to the three factions, he asked suddenly. Issei narrowed his eyes as he heard the storm god. Amaterasu instantly spoke up. Don't speak like that, Susanoo. It wouldn't be wise to anger this boy, she said loudly. Susanoo looked at Amaterasu and spoke up. I just want to know if he can handle himself. Someone who is taking on the 3 factions should be able to. Honestly, he doesn't seem like much, he said snidely. Issei's eyebrows twitched. Yasaka instantly stood up and slammed her fist on the desk. Susanoo, even if you're a god, you should respect others, she shouted. Susanoo glared at Yasaka. We're gods, not children. We don't need to following orders from a brat, he said loudly. That was the last straw. Issei stood up and looked sharply at Susanoo, who quickly smirked. What brat got something to say, he mocked. Issei's look turned into a full-blown glare. You think that I shouldn't be leading? Isn't it the strongest that usually leads? Do you think you could do any better? He asked. Susanoo chuckled and spoke up. You like a taste, brat? He asked. Yasaka quickly interrupted them. Calm down, both of you. We don't need you 2 fighting right now, she said loudly. Issei chuckled and turned towards the Yaokai leader. Actually, I think that's what needs to happen. Nothing too big, just a spar to show him who I am, he said. Yasaka didn't say anything. Susanoo quickly laughed. I think so too. This kid is in for a rude awakening, he said. Yasaka sighed and spoke up. Very well, let's go outside, she said. Before anyone knew it, they were outside. Susanoo and Issei were standing in a barrier with the others outside watching. Outside, Amaterasu started to speak up. So how much do we know about Issei's strength? She asked. Yasaka shrugged. Well, he did take on Great Red, so it's clearly beyond anything we've seen before, she said. Tsukuyomi nodded and watched the 2 of them. To be honest, he was quite interested in this little sparring session that was going to begin soon. He knew Susanoo wouldn't know what hit him. He was always a snob and didn't know when to stop. Hopefully, this would teach him some humility. However this fight turns out, there's no doubt in my mind that Susanoo won't know what hit him. This kid is obviously packing some power. His aura is concealed pretty well, but if you sense for it hard enough, you'll see it's very powerful. His energy is chaotic and destructive, he said suddenly. Yasaka and Amaterasu nodded, and they turned to the fight as Susanoo spoke up suddenly. This is your last chance to back out, he said. Issei chuckled and spoke up. I should be saying that, he replied. Susanoo narrowed his eyes and spoke loudly. I warned you, he shouted. Issei shook his head and got into a stance. Suddenly, a midnight blue glow appeared around Susanoo and a staff appeared in his hands. The others on the outside widened their eyes as they saw it. He was using his weapon so soon in the fight. Issei looked at the staff and knew it was powerful. Suddenly, 4 spheres of water appeared behind Susanoo and they shot off towards Issei like torpedoes. However, Issei wasn't scared. Not one bit. Suddenly, everyone's eyes, including Susanoo, widened as Issei vanished in a burst of speed. Behind him was an explosion. The water spheres collided with the trees as Issei easily dodged them. He quickly delivered a kick to Susanoo's back and sent him flying forwards a good bit. As Susanoo got back up, he looked at Issei for a good bit. How'd he do that? That was a very powerful burst of energy, he quickly thought. On the outside of the barrier, everyone was surprised at the speed Issei utilized. It was obvious he was barely trying and just toying with the storm god. Tsukuyomi knew now that he didn't want to pick a fight with the boy. It was obvious to him that he was outclassed by a good bit. He's definitely got the advantage with his speed, Yasaka said suddenly. Both Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi nodded. It will be hard for Susanoo to keep up with him. The question is, how was he able to create such speeds? It's obvious that it's not innate. No, it's something he learned to do. If it's a matter of how much he can do it, all Susanoo needs to do it. Wait it out, he said suddenly. Amaterasu turned to the moon god. You're right about that, however, don't count the boy out. It's obvious he's just getting started, she said. Yasaka nodded to her statement. That's true, she mumbled. She was astonished as she saw how he easily dodged Susanoo's water attacks, left and right. Like it was nothing to him. Back inside the barrier, Issei knew he needed to watch how much power he used. If he went overboard, he'd only damage his body even more. You're damn right you would, why'd you even challenge the god? Dragon roared inside his head. Issei rolled his eyes as he heard the dragon. He was being a punk and I felt like I needed to take him down a peg or two, he replied. Dragon just grumbled and went silent. As much as I'd like to see Susanoo get smacked around, Dragon is right, Issei. You can't go crazy or you'd only do harm to yourself, Bahamut said suddenly. Issei rolled his eyes again as he heard Bahamut. However, even he couldn't deny that their words held a large amount of truth to them. It would be utterly stupid and completely foolish for him to not heed their words. However, Issei also knew his limits and where he could take himself currently. He had no doubt in his mind that he wouldn't do that much damage to his body during this fight. He turned to Susanoo suddenly as the storm god spoke. I'll admit you have quite the technique with that speed boost you have, however, I am no pushover, he said loudly. Issei suddenly smirked. Neither am I, he replied. He charged again, but his speed was back to normal. He couldn't just go wasting his energy, so he'd have to hold back on some of his more powerful combos and techniques. Everyone was surprised again as Issei quickly ducked under Susanoo's staff as it was swung at him. It was after that Susanoo was sent flying yet again. With a tail. Outside the barrier, they were clearly not expecting that. He is a dragon, isn't he? Tsukuyomi asked quickly. Both Yasaka and Amaterasu nodded. It seems he isn't afraid to show off a bit either, Yasaka said with a bit of a blush. It was obvious the power was making both Yasaka and Amaterasu a little squeamish. They all watched as the tail disappeared. They suddenly turned as Susanoo roared angrily. Damn you, he shouted. Issei chuckled and prepared for whatever was coming his way. Suddenly the ground shook. Issei quickly fell on one knee as it was a bit too rough for him to withstand. He looked up just in time to see water rising and swirling like a torrent around Susanoo. It was coming from the cracks in the ground. Issei cursed and quickly rolled out of the way as a torrent of water shot past him. Susanoo was really taking this seriously. Outside the barrier, everyone was a bit shocked at how Susanoo was being. It was obvious to them he didn't care really. Tsukuyomi narrowed his eyes. The one weakness Susanoo had was his anger. It made him reckless and volatile. He wondered what Issei would do. Would he let the fight drag on, or would he put it to an end with something stronger than Susanoo could counter? Back inside the barrier, Issei was contemplating on what to do. As he continued to dodge the torrents of water that was fired in his direction continuously, he knew Susanoo could keep it up for a good bit. He was a storm god after all. However, he knew Susanoo had limits like everyone else. So he could wait it out and then strike and finish it, but he didn't want to do that, for a number of reasons. One, he didn't know Susanoo's limit. He didn't know how long he could keep it up, so he could be dodging for a good bit, and then he'd get tired and be exhausted. Two, he didn't feel like dragging the fight on any longer than it needed to be. So he decided to end it. Boost. Everyone looked at Issei and the boosted gear on his arm. Susanoo smirked. Issei was getting serious. However, what he didn't know was, he just wasn't getting serious. No, he was getting tired. He was ending it. Here we go, Tsukuyomi muttered as he saw the boosted gear. Both Amaterasu and Yasaka had their eyes glued to Issei as he prepared. They all were wondering what he was going to do. Susanoo shot of a few more torrents, which Issei easily dodged. Before anyone knew it, a large explosion happened and Issei was face to face with Susanoo, who was shell-shocked at how fast he became. It seemed this man was clearly a force to be reckoned with. This fight is over, Issei said loudly. Suddenly everyone was shocked as they saw a black energy cover Issei's fist and Susanoo was punched in the gut. The energy seemed to crackle and spark with destructive power as it exploded with extreme ferocity and sent Susanoo flying backwards straight into a tree. Everyone outside quickly covered their heads as the barrier was no match for the power he used, the howling winds from the shockwaves that escaped and roared far beyond. They should have reinforced the barrier to hold against that kind of power. As Issei powered down, he looked over to see Tsukuyomi walking over to the downed Susanoo and hoisting him up on his shoulders. Yasaka and Amaterasu came over. They seemed nervous. "Don't worry, I just wanted to teach the prick a lesson," he said suddenly. They were surprised at how fast his expression changed. "Well, that was certainly something. You're right about Susanoo. He can be a little rude sometimes. His ego gets the best of him," Tsukuyomi said suddenly. Issei nodded, then started to speak again. "As I was here earlier my group is near ready to move. In about 3-4 days, the underworld will be engaged in war. Our base will be in the dragon's territory," he said suddenly. They all hummed and nodded. "Very well, the Shinto gods will fight with you as well," Amaterasu said quickly. Issei gave a bright smile. It seemed it made Yasaka and Amaterasu even more squeamish as they tried to hide a blush. It was obvious they were starting to have feelings for him. "Well, I think it's time for me to return," Issei said suddenly. They nodded and watched as Issei started to fly off. It seemed the next few days were going to interesting, no doubt. Scene break 3 days later. It has been 3 days since Issei's fight with Susanoo. He and his group found themselves outside currently. It was time. They were ready to head to the dragon's territory. "So you guys know the drill?" Issei asked suddenly. Everyone nodded their heads. "We're not going to teleport straight into the dragon's territory. We'll be where the battle took place, the Mrbabybornree estate to be exact," he said suddenly. Some of them were a bit confused by that. "Why not just straight take it over?" Donosik asked suddenly. Some of them agreed with him. Issei sighed and spoke up again. "We don't know if anyone will be around. They may be searching the rubble for anything that is useful, so we're going to scout it out first and see what's going on," he explained. They all nodded after hearing him. Issei started to form the magic circle, and soon a gigantic blood-red circle engulfed the group and they disappeared. As soon as they appeared in the underworld, they were shocked at what they saw. "Damn, you weren't kidding when you said it was a wasteland," Donosik muttered. Issei rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Well, it was quite a fight," he said. Great Red chuckled. "That is an understatement," he added. Everyone agreed with him. "So what now?" Vali asked. Everyone turned to Issei. "Let's look inside what is now left of the Mrbabybornree estate and see if we can find anything that could be useful," he said. Everyone nodded and turned to the large burnt-up building. It was obvious to them. It was time to get to work. Chapter 21, Dawn of War PT3. The group stood at the ruins of the Mrbabybornree estate and decided it would be best to scavenge for any supplies before they headed towards the dragon's territory. They decided it was best to split up. Tiamat, Cockabeel, Donosik, and Penemu found themselves grouped together. They were looking for information, anything that could help figure out what the factions' plans were. "So what exactly are we looking for?" Donosik asked, bored. They currently found themselves in Surzech's old study. "Anything that details war plans, battle formations, coordination, anything along those lines," Cockabeel said suddenly. Donosik sighed and began to look around the room for anything that popped out, anything that was out of place, suspicious, or anything like that. He soon came to Surzech's desk and looked at it. It was a standard desk, one that you'd see in any office or study. He quickly started looking in the drawers. However, he didn't find anything worthwhile. However, as he closed a drawer, he noticed one with a lock. It was obviously locked, and he had no idea what was in it. So he decided to force it open. Cockabeel, Tiamat, and Penemu were surprised when they felt Donosik's energy rise and looked to him to see him holding a light axe. They watched in wonder as he swung it downwards with a ton force. Then they heard a sharp cracking sound as he broke the lock. "What was that for?" Cockabeel asked seriously. Penemu looked at Donosik like he was an idiot. Donosik looked dryly at the warmonger and the former secretary of the Grigori. "This drawer had a lock on it. Must be something important for a Mao to lock it up," he said. That made Cockabeel raise an eyebrow. Penemu just shook her head. All of them walked over towards where he was and decided to take a look. Both Tiamat and Cockabeel, along with Penemu, stepped forwards as Donasik pulled out a few yellow folders. They were basic, for storing documents. He set them on the table and Cockabeel opened them and started looking at them. His eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. "What is it?" Tiamat asked suddenly. She noticed his expression and knew instantly something was up. Donasik turned to Cockabeel as he heard him chuckle. "Surzech was an idiot, all right. To hide these in a simple locked drawer is completely moronic," he started. Tiamat rose an eyebrow. "What are they exactly?" she asked, impatient. Donasik wanted to know too. He wanted to get on with it already. "These are battle plans and they're descriptive as hell. The amount in here details the devils, angels, and fallen's positions. It also lists potential matchups, like they're setting us up with someone else. Norse is in here as well. This info is completely suspicious though. Why would Surzech leave it in a simple locked drawer?" he said suddenly. That made sense as well. "Maybe it's an outdated one, maybe they scrapped it," Donasik suggested. Penemu looked at Cockabeel for a second. "It's possible that could be the case. Most of the time at the Grigori, we would just put old folders in a large file cabinet, just in case we needed them later," she said suddenly. Cockabeel shrugged. "It's not entirely impossible, however. This is something we can use. Even if it was scrapped, they're most likely going to use the same ideas, just change them around a bit. This will help us predicting what they will do," he said suddenly. Tiamat looked around the study for a bit. "Well, it seems that we got what we were looking for. Let's head back to the rendezvous point and wait for the others," she said suddenly. Both of them looked at her for a moment and then nodded. Before they knew it, they were back at the spot they were told to wait. That's what they had to do. They were the first ones back. Scene break with Issei's group. With Issei, there was Kuroka, Rainer, and Vali. They were looking for an armory. Any weapons they might find were going to be useful. Issei didn't know what could be in it, however. He knew about the Grimoire's wealth. "What exactly are we looking for?" Vali asked suddenly. Issei shrugged. He had no real idea where to start. "There's got to be one somewhere. I don't know though. I've never seen one when I was here. However, they would be stupid to not have one," he replied. None of them really ideas as well. "Maybe we search the bedrooms. The masters may have some secret armories," Vali said suddenly. Issei thought about it for a moment. It was a possibility. There was no doubt in his mind about that, so he shrugged and then nodded. "We should start with Surzech's father and mother's room. They would be the most likely to have one," he said suddenly. So they started towards the room and opened the door. They were surprised to see it in well condition. Issei looked around the room for a moment, seeing if there was anything out of place or suspicious. "Find anything?" he heard Rainer say. Vali shook her head while Issei shook his as well. Kuroka just sighed. "Maybe it's somewhere else," she said. Issei shrugged, then took another look around the room and his eyes finally landed on the bed. He quickly looked under to find something off. He couldn't really tell what was under it. So he only had one choice. "You guys might want to step back a bit," he said suddenly. They nodded and stepped back. Then they watched as a blood-red glow started to cover Issei's arms. Before anyone knew it, both of his arms had transformed into their dragon side. Issei easily slid the bed across the room and finally got a better look at what was underneath. It was a switch of some sort. "What do you think it activates?" Vali asked suddenly. Issei shrugged. "Only one way to find out," he said suddenly. They all watched as he pulled the switch back. They all turned around when they started to hear gears turning. They were surprised when a false panel was revealed and a staircase was behind it. "Where could this go?" Issei said aloud. No one had an answer to that, so they did the only thing they knew. They walked down to see where it would lead then. Before they knew it, they had walked down a large amount of stairs and came to a large door made of steel. Issei knew this was a personal armory, and not the big one they were looking for. His thoughts were proven correct when he easily blasted the door off its hinges, and they finally got a good look inside the room. It was a personal armory, all right. There wasn't that much there, probably for Lord Mrbabybornree and his wife. A few swords, spears, and shields, some armor as well. Well, this is certainly a start, but not what we're looking for, right, Issei? Kuroka said suddenly. Issei nodded, then everyone watched as a large magic circle enveloped the armory and the weapons and armor disappeared. A pocket dimension, Volley asked, confused. She didn't know he could do that. It seemed everyone else thought that as well. Based on their expressions, they had the same thoughts as Volley. Yes, I had recently begun to learn how to use them. It took a few tries to get it right, but it eventually worked perfect, he explained. Issei looked around for a bit. Okay then, time to search some more. This was obviously just some sort of panic room that happened to be in personal armory. We need to find the main one, however. I have no idea where to start, he said suddenly. Volley thought about it for a moment. In the mansion, the armory is under the foundation, like a basement. Maybe it's the same here, she suggested. Issei shrugged once again. He had no idea, however, he had no other options. Let's take a look around and see what we find, he said. They nodded and they walked out of the personal armory and back into the estate. They headed towards the stairs and descended underneath. They were shocked to find a pathway of corridors expanding all around them. Which way do we go? Kuroka asked, confused. Issei looked around for a moment. He then got an idea. He walked up to one of the corridors and put his hand on the wall. The rest of them watched with confusion and some anticipation. They were shocked when a burst of energy erupted from his hand and exploded outwards. They quickly put their hands up to block the wave of energy as it passed through them. They watched as he pulled back his hand and looked at the spot where it was. There was a small crater there. I marked this corridor as we will go through it first. I will do the same to the rest as we go on. That way we will find something eventually, he said. With that said, the group walked on. Scene break with another group. In a group consisted of Irina, Kalawarner, Bhikkhu, and Arthur. They were assigned to food. Any provisions they found would be useful, so they found themselves in the most obvious of places. The kitchen. However, there was a problem. With the battle between Great Red and Issei, the kitchen was the area that was affected the most, so there wasn't that much left. However, they were determined to find something. So they started looking through cabinets to find only ingredients. No real food yet. Where should we search next? Irina asked suddenly. Bhikkhu put his hand on his chin as he thought about it. He looked around and spotted something suspicious. The group watched curiously as Bhikkhu walked over to what looked like a piece of wood. It was a piece of wood, but it was different. Bhikkhu saw a handle and pulled up on it. A cellar, he wondered aloud. The group shrugged and followed him down. They were surprised to see it full of food. A pantry, huh? Arthur muttered. Bhikkhu shrugged. It works, he said. They couldn't argue with that. So what do? We can't transport all of this, Irina said suddenly. Kalawarner shrugged. Irina was right. Let's let Issei know we found this, then he'll decide what to do, Arthur said suddenly. The group nodded and started to walk out. They were headed towards the rendezvous point that Issei decided. By the time they got there, everyone else was already there. So what did you guys find? Issei asked suddenly. Irina looked at him and replied. A pantry full of unused food. It's in a cellar in the kitchen. We couldn't transport it all, so we decided to let you decide what to do with it, she said. Issei nodded and turned to Cockabeel. Anything useful? He asked. Cockabeel grinned and handed him the folder. Take a look, he said. Issei's eyes widened as he looked over it. Okay then, I want you to make a plan according to this. We need to be ready, he said loudly. Cockabeel nodded and took the folder back. So did you find anything good? Tiamat asked. Issei chuckled and nodded. A fuck ton of weapons and armor. It was a bit tough to find it. It did take a bit longer than I expected. However, there's enough, he said. The group sighed and nodded. Issei looked around and it seemed he was waiting for someone else. "Who are you looking for?" Vali asked, confused. Issei chuckled and pointed upwards. They all looked upwards to see Great Red in his dragon form. He landed about 10 feet from them. They then watched as he started to glow a bright golden and transformed into his human form and started to walk over. "What did you find?" Issei asked. Great Red was assigned to a scouting position to look for any enemies that were here prematurely. Nothing really too bad. There were some scattered parties around the area, nothing too big though, about 3-5 devils a group. Tannon is around the dragon's territory right now. I could sense his energy. I hid mine so that I wouldn't be found out. However, it seems that with the parties out that the factions are moving. The war is coming," he said. Issei nodded and turned to the group. "Well, you heard him. This is it. The time has come. Are you ready?" Issei shouted. The response was expected. A roar of cheers and agreement flew throughout the area. "Well then, let's go visit Tannon, shall we?" he grinned. Chuckles erupted as the group entered a magic circle and teleported to the dragon's territory. As they reappeared on the mountain, Issei stepped forwards and looked around. This area would be good base once they made it. However, that would come at a later time. It was time to confront Tannon. Everyone stepped back as Issei let out his power. The area around him started to crack and shake as he powered up. It was monumental, the amount he held. They knew Tannon would come soon. He was calling for him after all, a challenge of power. Everyone knew that dragons couldn't resist a challenge. Power attracted power. Soon a large shadow descended among the area as Tannon arrived. "So the brat has arrived. I knew this day would come," he spoke in a deep voice. Tannon looked over the group and sighed. He knew what they were here for. "So you have gathered a very powerful group all on your own. It seems the rumors were right," he said suddenly. Issei wasn't in the mood for chit-chat. It was time to get on with it. "I'll be quick here, Tannon. You know the reason why I'm here, so I'll give you a choice. Either join me or side with the rest of the cannon fodder," Issei shouted loudly. The group's eyes widened as they heard him. It seemed he wasn't taking no bullshit. It was either join or become prey. That was obvious enough. Now it was just whether or not Tannon would join. They all waited for his answer. Tannon sighed as he heard him. "To ask such a thing, you have the power to destroy millions of lives at your hands, no billions. However, you are generous enough to give an enemy a chance. Such a thing is not common. Maybe it is time for a change, however, I have to decline. My pride as a dragon would be destroyed if I gave in that easily," he responded. Issei sighed and closed his eyes. "Very well, you have made your decision, as have I," Issei replied loudly. Tannon narrowed his eyes as Issei let out more energy and looked him in the eyes. "The time has come, Tannon, prepare yourself," he shouted. Tannon widened his eyes as Issei charged with blinding speeds. One single punch sent him flying backwards. It was time. It was starting. Nothing would be the same afterwards. Chapter 22, Dawn of War Finale. If anyone were to be in the area of the battlefield, they would see a large purple and black dragon flying backward, knocking up and unrooting trees as it traveled backward. The world was going to be changed very soon, and it all started with that moment. Nothing would be the same, never again. "Way to start it, Issei," Cockabeel chuckled. Issei shrugged and spoke up. "Well, that should get their attention," he said loudly. Cockabeel was about to speak once again, but something interrupted him. Everyone turned towards the sound of a roar coming from where Tannon was. It seemed he wasn't done. "Persistent, eh? Very well, I'll show you just who you're facing," Issei thought with determination. Everyone looked towards Issei as he walked forwards, waiting for Tannon to come back. Everyone saw this and started to step back. They knew that Issei was going to prove a point, and that usually meant that he was going to use something powerful. As Tannon hovered above the group, he spoke in a deep voice. "You are very powerful, yes, but I will be damned if I gave up that easily. I will not stop until I'm dead," Tannon shouted loudly. Issei shook his head and sighed. It seemed that was the only way. Very well, he said it himself, so that is what will happen. Have you made your peace? Issei asked loudly. Everyone, even Tannon, wondered what he meant. When Tannon didn't respond, Issei sighed, then began to speak yet again. You have chosen your side in this war. You said that you will not stop until death. I asked if you made your peace because death is what you will get, Issei said loudly. Tannon narrowed his eyes then chuckled. You are a very generous person when you need to be, Issei Hyoudou. You have said your warning and I accept it. It is a fight to the death then, Tannon roared. Issei shook his head then grinned. Very well, if it is a fight to the death you want, then a fight to the death you will get, he roared loudly. Tannon nodded, he knew what was coming. Suddenly Tannon roared and spat out a torrent of flames towards the group. Everyone got on the defensive and ready to fight back, but they stopped when Issei rose his hand. Everyone felt the pressure increase tenfold as Issei started to power up. He held out his hand and a sphere of annihilation started to form. However, he clenched his fist around it and suddenly it launched a blast of the volatile energy towards the flames. The flames were no match. They were devoured by Issei's attack. It was no use. Tannon was hopelessly outmatched, but his pride blinded him from seeing just that. It seemed Issei would have to force him to see that. Tannon suddenly dove at high speeds towards Issei. Issei saw this and motioned for everyone to scatter. Tannon's attack would no doubt cause some damage, and he couldn't dodge it either. As Tannon neared Issei, he prepared himself. Welsh Dragon Annihilation Balance Breaker, the call was heard. The same glow everyone in Issei's group had seen before had blinded them while Issei went into his balance breaker. Boost X3, the gauntlet called out. As Tannon neared him, Issei held his hands out forwards. As Tannon finally crashed into Issei, he tried to push back with as much force as he could muster, but the velocity of which Tannon charged was a little much. However, he wasn't afraid. It would be a good day in hell if he was afraid. Boost X5, the gauntlet called out yet again. Issei pivoted quickly while holding on to Tannon and spun around and threw the Dragon King towards a tree. The crashing sound of Tannon was loud enough for everyone to hear, but it was obvious Tannon wasn't done yet. No, the sound of his enraged roar made it very clear to everyone there. Tannon charged once again towards Issei, clawing and swiping at him every chance he could get. However, Issei just dodged and dodged. He was just too fast for Tannon to land a successful hit. However, Tannon wouldn't relent. Not at all. Issei saw this and knew it was time to end it once and for all. Boost X5, the gauntlet called again. Everyone wondered what he was doing. He could have easily put Tannon out of commission, but it seemed that Issei was trying to prove a point. Blade, everyone heard it loud and clear. Tannon knew what that sword was and he eyed it warily. He knew now that Issei was going to fulfill his promise of a fight to the death. Issei vanished in a burst of speed. Tannon didn't even see him move. He suddenly gasped out in pain as he felt the blade connect against his shoulder. Issei followed it up with a high-powered kick that sent Tannon flying yet again. You chose your side and I have chose mine, Tannon. This is the end, Issei shouted loudly. Tannon's eyes widened as he looked at his opponent. He was utterly foolish to try and fight Issei if he wanted to live. He needed to escape, but how? That was the question that was running through his head. That's when something popped into his head. Issei stopped as Tannon stood up. He thought for a second that he wasn't done, but something in his gut told him different. That's when Tannon let out a gigantic breath of fire in a 360-degree motion. All the trees started to go up in flames and smoke was making it very hard to see. Issei knew now what he was doing. Shit, he quickly thought. He charged into the smokescreen, trying to put Tannon out before he could escape. However, it was already too late. He didn't feel his presence anymore or his energy. Issei roared with anger as a burst of energy erupted around him, clearing away the smoke. Tannon escaped. Shit, Issei screamed. Everyone walked forwards as Issei started to calm down. He escaped, so what now? Donosik asked curiously. Issei looked up for a moment. We train, Tannon escaping will only hasten the factions coming. I'd expect it to fully start in a day or two, he said loudly. Volley had a question suddenly, so she started to speak up. What are we going to do for shelter? This area isn't big enough for us to all go to sleep and stay for the next few weeks as this war continues to go on, she said loudly. Issei looked at her for a moment. I agree with you on that, so we will use the Mrbabybornree estate. It's the best we can do, so we just have to make do with it, he said loudly. Everyone nodded at that, and before they knew it, they were outside the Mrbabybornree estate for the day to train. So what we will be doing? Cockabill asked curiously. Issei thought about it for a moment. They had been training for quite some time, and Issei knew they were ready. However, more training couldn't hurt. That's when he got an idea. For today, we will do this in 2 parts. One group will face me today and spar, and tomorrow the other group will face me, he said loudly. Everyone listened in as he began to speak yet again. Today's group will be Cockabill, Calawarner, Kuroka, Tiamat, and Bhikkhu, he said loudly. Everyone was surprised he was going to face off against 5 of them. However, they knew better. He had something in mind to counter just that. They would just have to wait and see. The 5 of them nodded and stepped up. Issei looked at them for a moment. Cockabill, Tiamat, and Kuroka would be a tough matchup, and to add the other 2 would be even more against him, and he knew that very well. Suddenly Cockabill summoned a large light spear and charged at Issei. He was fast, no doubt. However, Issei was faster. As Issei went to counter Cockabill, an energy blast came from Kuroka. Tiamat was in her dragon form, spray fire around him. They were trying to corner him right off the bat. That was smart, no doubt. It seemed they were using teamwork against him. Bhikkhu and Calawarner were staying back for a bit. It seemed they were waiting for an opportunity. Issei saw this and smirked. This made it a lot easier for him. Boosted gear, everyone heard. Before their very eyes, Issei had summoned his sacred gear. They knew now if he was starting off with his sacred gear, then that meant he planned to push them to edge of the limits. As Cockabill neared Issei, he knew he needed to get him back quickly, before the others joined in. Blade, everyone knew what was coming. Issei instantly put up a scalon to block as Cockabill struck with his spear. Issei put a lot of force as he started to push down on Cockabill's spear. Suddenly the spear shattered as it was too much. Issei gave a bloodthirsty grin, one that Cockabill knew all too well. Cockabill let out a gasp for breath as Issei elbowed him in the solar plexus. Issei followed it up with a powerful kick that sent Cockabill flying backwards. Tiamat saw this and decided to dive down towards Issei and instantly transformed out of her dragon form. Cockabill would no doubt be down for a bit, but Issei knew that Warmonger would be back for more. Bhikkhu stepped up as Kuroka did as well. Bhikkhu held his staff ready in his hand as Kuroka started preparing senjutsu. It was now a 3v1 with Calawarner still waiting and Cockabill down for a bit. Bhikkhu suddenly dashed in a burst of speed. Issei's eyes widened. Bhikkhu was a lot faster than he let on. That was a problem, and Issei knew that he needed to be careful around him. Sure, Issei was faster, but Bhikkhu no doubt would be creative and would keep his tricks up his sleeve. Suddenly Bhikkhu vanished in burst of smoke. That's when Issei felt his movement restricted. He looked down to see a snake wrapped around him. Shit, I forgot he has the ability to shapeshift, Issei thought quickly. The situation was getting worse now. With his movement restricted, he wouldn't be able to defend against them properly. He had an idea, but he knew it would damage Bhikkhu quite a bit. However, this was nothing compared to what they would face in the oncoming weeks. Suddenly Issei's energy skyrocketed. The snake Bhikkhu was transformed into started to turn real dark. Issei's volatile energy started to burn Bhikkhu. The snake slithered off and a poof of smoke happened, revealing Bhikkhu with large burns. Fortunately, he was still breathing. Issei knew that would take him out for a good bit. The others looked a little wary at Bhikkhu. They knew now he was serious and would do whatever it took in a close situation. Kuroka suddenly started to glow a purple and a magic circle appeared behind her. Issei knew what was coming. Welsh Dragon Annihilation Balance Breaker, everyone heard. Before their eyes, Issei was powered up and ready. Collateral decided to step forwards now. It seemed this sparring session would be a little longer than Issei thought, however, once again it was time to fight. Suddenly, Kuroka launched several energy blasts while Tiamat dove downwards while spraying a large breath of fire. Collateral stood ready, waiting for the opportunity to strike. Issei instantly took to the skis. He knew what to do. As everyone watched him hover in the skis, they wondered what he was going to do. Suddenly, the boosted gear on his arm started to form a red sphere above it. Everyone knew what was coming, and with his new powers, it would only magnify its power. Dragon shot. Everyone scattered as the blast rained down towards the ground. However, a few of them didn't have enough time to get out of the way. Kuroka managed to put up a shield around her, but the blast was too powerful, leaving her energy exhausted and barely any left in the tank. Collateral took it the most. The blast had sent her flying into a tree, instantly knocking her unconscious. Tiamat landed in front of Issei as Cockabeel finally stood back up. This sparring session was coming to a close. It seemed that Cockabeel and Tiamat were going to try to finish it by themselves. They just have to see how much damage they could dish out before they inevitably lost. They knew it too, but they'd be damned if they didn't try. Issei saw their determination and grinned, and gave them the motion to come at him. They did just that. As Cockabeel charged with a light spear in hand, he knew he was already exhausted and wouldn't last the much longer, but still, there was no reason to not give it his all. Tiamat felt the same way too. They knew they were facing an impossible opponent, but yet they tried. That was all Issei wanted to see, and he saw enough of it in this fight. However, they made it very clear they weren't done. Issei didn't have a problem with that either. Issei quickly grabbed Cockabeel's arm that was aiming for him and twirled him around and launched him high in the air. Tiamat was now the only one left, however. She got a sinking feeling in her gut, telling her to surrender now. However, her dragon's pride took control as she charged Issei head-on. Issei only smirked and released his wings. Boost, everyone heard. Issei dashed towards Tiamat and grabbed a hold of her and took to the skis. Cockabeel was starting to fall already as Issei started to hover above the area. He looked at Cockabeel falling down, barely conscious. He knew with what was coming next, both of them would be unconscious. Tiamat's eyes widened as Issei started to spin like crazy, then launched her down towards the ground, in the exact path of Cockabeel too. She knew what he did, but it was too late. She couldn't correct her path, and it was obvious that Issei was ready for more, if needed. As Tiamat connected with Cockabeel's body, she knew there was a lot of pain coming. A blast of dust erupted as the two of them collided with the ground at high speeds. The sparring session was over, and it was obvious to everyone. Issei was serious, and he would push them to their limits, whether they liked it or not. Chapter 23, Slaughterhouse PT-1. The group that was up next against Issei was Irina, Arthur, Volley, Rainier, and Dohinsik. LeFay didn't want to participate. She said that she wanted to conserve her strength for what was to come. Issei had no problem with it either, so he let watch from the sidelines like the other group who he faced previously. However, something in Issei's mind was nagging him. It was eerily quiet for the day, and whenever that was the case, that usually meant something was on the horizon. He was right too. If he only knew, he stopped the sparring session and have everyone prepare for battle. He didn't even get to say anything to his friends as they charged in with no hesitation except for Rainier. Issei instantly knew she was starting off with a ranged approach, and that meant he needed to watch closely. If he were to slip up, they could easily get him with some support. Dohinsik instantly tried to slash downwards at him with his axe, however Issei casually sidestepped it. As he whipped his head around to gauge what the others were doing, they were all about to strike at him. He knew time was key here. If he tried to counter at all, he would most likely still get hit by a few of them, so he needed to create some distance and rethink his strategy. Without a second to spare, he unfurled his wings and used them to shield him like a dome of sorts. It was the best he could think of in what little time he had. As he felt them connect with his wings, he spread them as wide as they could, knocking them back a good couple of feet. He quickly leapt up into the air. That's when Rainier threw a light spear. As Issei quickly summoned a scallon and deflected it easily, however he knew now they weren't stopping until they had won. His mind instantly went to work to start picking apart the group. His plan was simple. Take them out one by one and start with Rainier. He wasn't going to hurt her much, just get her to quit on her own will. Then he would deal with the rest of them. He wasn't going to waste any time, and everyone he faced saw that as he instantly summoned the boosted gear. Boost! Everyone heard it loudly. He dashed in, but she decided she was going to charge in as well. Issei quickly blocked as Rainier struck with her light spear. That's when Arthur dashed in quickly. Issei had no choice but to back away. Arthur had a sharp eye and would give a good fight. He needed to do enough damage one by one and hopefully get someone to start to feel fatigue, and he could take an opportunity. But he wasn't going to go lightly on all of them. That was the reason Great Red wasn't fighting. A clash of those proportions would only spell trouble. As soon as Donosik started to approach along with Arthur, with Volley and Irina backing them up, he knew he had no choice. A little shift in power was needed, and they would see just what he was made of. Arthur's instincts told to him run. As soon as he saw the dark energy he heard that Issei gained in the fight with Red. He felt Issei's energy flare up as soon as he coated his fist with it. His only choice was to leap away as Issei tried to pounce on him, his fist crashing into the ground as he missed Arthur. The ground itself cracked, and he formed a small crater from the sheer force that was backing that punch. Issei wasn't giving up either. He was going after Arthur and making sure he got him out while the others were distracted. Arthur's precision and timing were impeccable. Arthur barely had any time to dodge as Issei dashed in swiftly. He didn't see it coming as Issei instantly delivered a kick to the ribs that sent him flying. Issei held back, and thankfully he did. He knew a powered-up kick would be damaging, but anything he crashes into would do more damage, but that was the point. Arthur would be out for a while, and if he managed to pull it back together, he would be weakened. Issei looked at Volley and knew what was coming. He quickly blocked a punch for Volley, but that wasn't good enough. As he saw her grin, Issei instantly prepared for what was coming. Divide! Issei heard Albion's voice come from the wings on her back. Issei felt the slight drain in his energy. He knew Volley wasn't going to go down without a fight. She was his rival, and her strength and willpower proved it. However, Issei's new strength was something else. That's why when everything started, his true power would be shown for all to see. As Issei regained his bearings, he noticed Donosik closing in again. However, his focus was now on Volley. Issei charged at Volley with Donosik following closely behind him. As Donosik finally caught up, he tried to strike at him. However, Issei was waiting. With a swift motion, he ducked under him and then elbowed him in the gut. Donosik had no time to see what was coming. Issei had already begun to grab his arm and toss him over his shoulder. Volley quickly backed up as Donosik was smashed into the ground. Issei didn't wait around and jumped towards Volley to start on her. Volley definitely looked ready. Issei didn't hesitate and quickly leapt into action. Volley barely had time to put up a guard as Issei came in hard and fast. As Issei's fist connected with Volley's arm, he tried to follow it up with a kick to the ribs. However, Volley managed to jump back just in time. That was when Issei stopped. He was obviously concentrating on something, but what? That was the question that was in everyone's minds, and they were going to get an answer. Volley was the first one to speak up. Issei, what's going on? Why'd you stop? She asked. Issei turned his head towards her and prepared for what he was going to say. We got company, was all he said. That was all that needed to be said. In an instant, everyone's attitude was serious. Who and where? The others asked when they approached. Issei looked over to where he could feel the power source. There was a few of them. He had no idea who they were, but their energy levels were off the charts. Whoever they are strong, and there's more than one person. It seems the time has come. Are you ready, my friends? Issei asked at the end, and his response was obvious. Issei was proud to look at the determination on their faces. It was time to go to work. As soon as he turned around, he closed his eyes again. They were coming towards them. Before they knew it, two figures appeared and started walking towards the group. Issei was practically on guard the moment he sensed them. He dared them to try anything. He wasn't waiting around either. "Who are you guys?" he asked loudly. Both of them were strangers, and he could tell they were very powerful. However, it wouldn't do them any good. His thought process was disrupted as soon as one of them started to speak. "So this is the kid that is starting a war, brother." The voice was hardened. It was obvious they were siblings. The brother of the one that spoke looked at his sibling and spoke in a harsh, condescending tone. "Yes, Thor, however, we aren't here to talk. We have orders we need to complete," he said. Thor then looked at Issei and started to speak. "My brother Loki is right, Issei Hyoudou. Me and you shall fight. Show me your strength, Red Dragon Emperor," Thor said strongly. Issei looked at him sharply. "Thor, the Norse god of thunder, why send him and Loki first? They're both no pushover. They came at the wrong time though. We may have been sparing, but the last group is almost recovered. Red is around too. I know he's coming already." Issei's thoughts started going into overdrive. Before he knew it, the dragon he was just thinking about appeared through a portal. His face was hardened and ready to destroy his enemies. "Who is this dragon? Another one a part of your new group?" Thor asked quickly. Issei looked about ready to speak up, but Red took the opportunity for himself. "Me? I'm sure you heard of me as Guardian. You may call me Red, however, you should know that I'm the only one to go toe-to-toe with my friend at my side while he was at high power level. Should you think you have any chance at all against him, you're wrong, and you should thought about fighting a guy who fought Great Red to a near standstill," he said with a smirk. Thor's eyes narrowed as he heard what Red said. He wasn't giving up that easily. He looked at Great Red and spoke. "Apocalyptic dragon, it is my brother Loki you will fight. I'm here for your partner and nothing more," he said stronger. Red shook his head but spoke anyways. "All right, well, I warned you, however, this road you're both going down is a one-way ticket to a beatdown," he said loudly. Loki, who was silent for the most part, decided to put his 2 cents out. "Shut it, you impudent fool. You shouldn't take me too lightly. I'm a god after all," he said it short and sweet. Issei looked at the god for a moment. "You are the one who is sorely mistaken. We are dragons of such power you wouldn't realize it until it was all out in a fight. You have come to your graves, Norse gods." Loki snorted and glared at Issei. "You little brat, I will enjoy watching my brother beat you to a bloody pulp," he screamed. Issei shook his head. He was honestly getting tired of this. "Save it, brother, we need to complete our mission," Thor said suddenly. Loki looked like he wanted to retaliate at his brother, but he decided against it. They were about to face high-level warriors with some serious abilities. However, unfortunately for them, Issei's patience was running thin. Too thin, in fact. He was about wait around anymore. Either come with all you got or don't come at all. Great Red was about to speak up but looked over to Issei, who was eerily silent, which usually meant something was wrong. Obviously, Issei was deadly serious now. Issei looked at the dragon he faced a little while ago and spoke. "Red, you have my permission to use anything you can think of to defeat Loki. As for you, Thor, I have no more patience for this. I'm done giving warnings. My friend may have warned you, however, you still will fight with determined eyes. I don't know if you've accepted your death or not, but your end is coming, Thor. No more games, fight like you mean it, because I am," he said loudly. As he said that, everyone felt the pressure kick in as Issei decided to partially transform into a dragon. It started to increase as his tail formed. Both of his hands turned rugged and had sharp claws protruding from his hands. There was no doubt whatsoever he was serious. Issei had been training a bit with his newfound powers, and he had found he could use his power in multiple ways. He had found that through partially transforming, his strength and speed was increased, allowing him to be more agile. His semi-transformed state allowed him to form his tail and claws, which in a fight were deadly weapons if used right. The backdraw was he couldn't use his sacred gears, but the fact he had increased speed and strength in this form, it no doubt was a good form for fighting. He hadn't really tested it out on anyone in a fight yet, since this was a form to be used in a true battle. Thor had zero time to think of what to do before Issei launched himself towards the Asgardian, easily landing a powerful blow that sent Thor flying backwards out of the area. Red caught a glimpse of Issei launching himself towards Thor with no hesitation and some quick speed. As he looked at Loki, it was obvious to him. It was go time. Loki instantly looked at Red, who started dodging as Loki started firing energy blasts at him. Loki didn't hit him with any of the shots he fired, and Red suddenly disappeared. Loki looked all around but couldn't find him at all. However, he could sense his energy all over the place. He was here, but he wasn't able to be seen. Suddenly, he heard something behind him. He turned to see a portal opening. He quickly lifted his hand as several energy blasts connected with a magic circle that he used to block the attack. Red, however, was nowhere to be seen. Loki once again looked around. He was completely gone. He needed to figure what he was doing and fast before Red seized an opportunity. Sadly, Loki didn't realize it was already too late. Before he knew it, Red had already jumped out of a portal and was soaring towards Loki at great speeds. As he turned around to see what was going on, he was already lifted up and carried high into the air. Loki tried to break the hold Red had on him. However, Red's physical strength was way too much for Loki to overcome. He had to think of something quickly, but once again it was too late. Red started to spin Loki violently and hurled him down to the ground with a ton of force. Everyone cringed as Loki crashed violently into the ground. They all watched as Red landed back down on the ground, looking like it was nothing to him. In fact, he had a shit-eating grin on his face. It was like he was having fun tormenting Loki. However, his grin quickly was replaced with a serious expression as soon as he felt Loki's energy skyrocket. He was too late in his reaction and was hit with a gigantic energy blast that sent him flying backwards. The rest of the group knew Red wasn't done for, and he wouldn't be done for a while. Loki looked like he was about to celebrate, but he was cut off. By your expression, you probably thought you had won, right? Too much pride you have, Asgardian. To think you could finish me off that easily was foolish, and now it is time for me to get serious, as it seems you are as well, he said loudly. Red's energy exploded as soon as he said that. Loki watched with horror as his energy condensed around him and then started to brighten as it was growing more and more potent. As the light finally died down, he gulped at what he saw. Red had used his energy to create an ethereal doppelganger. It was pretty much just like the original, except for the fact he could see just a bit through it. He barely had time as both of them charged simultaneously. Loki had a few ideas of what to do, but he had to be careful now. It was now a 2-on-1, but both of them were weaker than before. Loki knew it was some type of illusion magic that he was using that allowed him to do that. His doppelganger would most likely have most of his abilities, if not all of them. Its power, though, wouldn't be that bad due to the fact it was created from a bit of the original's power. So he chose to go on the defensive first and get some distance. As the two of them close in, a magic circle appeared under Loki, who had a large grin. A large explosion knocked Red and his doppelganger back. Red looked to his doppelganger as he recovered from Loki's attack. He ordered his doppelganger to change tactics. It was time to take this to the next level. Loki would need to be ready to keep it going. Before Loki knew it, the doppelganger dashed in close. Red took to the skis and began swiping at Loki while the doppelganger attacked on the ground. Loki had no idea what to do. His power was something else. Especially to deploy a tactic like that, if you cover both the ground and the air, that gave you a large advantage. He managed to block a power-packed fist from the doppelganger, but suddenly he felt a crushing blow to his back. Red used that moment he was distracted and crashed into him with a lot of force. The blow sent Loki tumbling to ground. As Loki got back up, he seriously needed to rethink his situation. It was turning more sour the more time raged forwards. If he didn't do something quick, it would be over, and it would have all been for nothing. That's when he decided. It was time to go all in. Either go all out or go home indeed. Red was surprised when Loki's energy started to rise once again. However, this time was different. This energy was equivalent to what a god's power should be. Loki was using every ounce of power he had in his veins in order to have a chance in this fight. Red grinned widely. Loki, Norse god of mischief, to put this much effort in a fight. You have shown me your resolve and the will to continue forwards through the fire that is laid out for you. For this you have my respect, but no, nothing you can do will matter anyways, he said loudly. Loki didn't hesitate and disappeared from Red's vision. Red smirked as he knew this wouldn't be that effective. There were a few ways he could find him with a bit of creative thinking. He really didn't know how Loki's ability worked. He knew there was ways to beat it. So he was about to try out a few different things. First thing he did was absorb the doppelganger to get the power back from it. He was going to need it for what he was going to be doing. That's when he sent out an energy wave. It was a complete circular wave that expanded as it traveled further away from Red. It was harmless and wouldn't hurt anything. However, that wasn't what it was for. When the wave collided with indifferent energy, Red would be able to sense it. That's when he noticed a small trace of energy a little bit above him. He looked at where it was and smirked. Found you, Red thought quickly. Now with that small trace of energy, he could try to pinpoint what Loki would do next, even though it was very small. He could do something about it. He could force Loki to use more, thus making him exposed. However, Red's train of thought was abruptly stopped as several light blue energy waves appeared out of thin air. That was a mistake on Loki's part. Even though Loki was trying to use confuse Red with all the energy blasts, Red was still able to find the source. He took off with breathtaking speeds, faster than anyone could tell. As he soared towards his destination, he had his fist ready to go with a lot of energy packed into it. When he threw the punch, he was surprised when he felt it connect. So Loki was just using a camouflage and not some dimension warping ability that Red was using. As he saw a gigantic crater form out of what was pretty much a span of a few seconds, he knew where he was. That's when Red landed by the crater. Loki looked up in horror as Red started to form a gigantic amount of energy condensed into his hand. It seemed this was the end. There was nothing left he could really do. However, he wasn't about to go down without a fight. No, that would be counteractive and show he didn't have what it took. When Red fired off the energy, Loki poured every ounce of power he had into a magic circle that got hit with Red's attack. As the two energies fought for dominance, it seemed like a stalemate. However, that was far from the case. Red smirked and lifted his hands again, forming another energy wave. He launched it with ferocity towards his already struggling attack to support it. Loki was done for. As the two attacks combined, Loki's circle wasn't able to handle it. It shattered completely, and Loki watched with horror as Red's attack was nearing him at a very quick pace. It was the end, and he knew it. That's when the attack hit him. The resulting explosion that was set off could be heard and seen from miles. If they didn't believe it yet, now they knew. Issei's group was not playing around. The end was coming. Chapter 24, Slaughterhouse Finale. As the group saw the mushroom cloud high above in the air, they knew Loki wasn't coming back from that. It was a ton stronger than what the human's atomic bomb could produce. The energy that rolled off in waves was catastrophic, destroying anything that came into contact with it as it raged onwards. Eventually the blast died down, but Red was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly a portal opened next to them, and out stepped the one and only person they were looking for. You warped to the gap before the blast went off to avoid damage, didn't you? Cockabeel asked suddenly. He nodded, then everyone looked to where his eyes were. It was in the direction of where Issei launched Thor. "So how do you think Thor will fare?" Vali asked him. He didn't even turn to her, his attention was completely focused on the forest that was distanced away. "Thor better heed my and Issei's warnings, cause if he doesn't he's as good as dead. Issei is deadly serious. We're most likely going to see him use his abilities to their fullest during this war. His power truly is, and will be recognized as a force to be reckoned with by the end of this." They all heard him. They knew it would be him to show up everyone who had abandoned him. Scene break with Issei. Thor barely had enough time to regain his bearings as he felt the incredible energy of his opponent coming towards him in leaps and bounds. As Issei finally appeared, Thor put up a guard as he was struck with a power-packed fist. He felt the energy behind the blow, and he knew now this was a serious situation. This opponent was not to be taken lightly, lest he would die. Issei quickly dodged Thor as he tried to strike him with his hammer. Thor wasn't quitting though, he kept on pressing, trying to get whatever hit he could. That's when Issei felt the hammer hit his stomach and was sent skidding backwards. He groaned as he felt the power behind the hammer. His thoughts were cut off as Thor started to spin his hammer wildly. Issei quickly rolled out of the way as the hammer was sent flying with an electric aura. He watched as it smashed into a tree behind him, completely obliterating it. Issei took that moment, since Thor didn't have his weapon back yet, and charged in with blinding speeds. Thor quickly felt a hook to the jaw and barely had time to register what was going on as Issei followed it up with a hard uppercut. In turn, Issei used his tail to grab Thor and throw him forcefully into a tree. Thor got the wind knocked out of him as he hit the trunk very fast and with a lot of force. Thor was honestly able to get right back up, and Issei knew that this fight was going to be a long one. He was a god after all, but Issei wasn't going to let anything stop him from reaching his goal. Thor quickly realized he needed to go all out to have any chance at beating him, so he decided then and there. No more games. Issei's reaction time was the only thing that made him able to dodge as Thor sped past him in a burst of speed. He noticed he was now covered in lightning. Issei quickly backflipped as Thor struck the ground with his hammer, making a good-sized crater in the process. Once he noticed his opponent escaped it, he pressed forwards yet again. On will, Issei's tail curled around him, shielding him from Thor's blows. He's fast and strong and stubborn as well. That makes him very likely to keep charging in. Maybe I should play the waiting game and strike when the opportunity arises, Issei thought to himself. However, he couldn't just wait around. The more damage he took, the more likely Thor would be able to deal a good hit on him and follow it up. Fatigue was not an option, so he decided it was time to take it up a notch. Thor watched with contemplation as Issei started to glow blood red. Suddenly, his more primal features returned to their human state. It seemed he was going out of his partial transformation. Boosted gear, Thor heard suddenly. As he looked at the crimson-spiked gauntlet, he knew his opponent was going to start using everything he had in his arsenal to defeat him. Boost. Thor quickly put his hammer up in a makeshift guard as Issei's fist met it. Though Thor knew Issei was stronger now than his partial form, he had the ability to use everything now, and the combo of his sacred gears made him a very lethal opponent to face. That's when he felt his legs get swept out from under him as he started to fall back. Issei followed it up with diving in with his elbow forwards, landing it right in the pit of his stomach. Boost. Issei quickly took that moment and grabbed Thor by his leg and started to spin him around crazily. Soon Thor was launched upwards, and he noticed a large amount of crimson energy forming at the tip of Issei's fingers. Dragon shot. Thor managed to block it with his hammer, but he knew Issei was just starting. That's when he noticed he didn't feel Loki's energy anymore. Even though they might not have really gotten along, it was still the fact he was his brother, and that was something to not forget. Family was family until the end. As Issei saw Thor's expression darken, he knew he was mad now. Suddenly the sky darkened and clouds were forming very quickly. Issei quickly dashed away as a lightning strike had landed where he was previously. More were coming as well. Issei decided to close their distance, extending his wings. He took off towards his target, weaving and dodging left and right as lightning strikes soared past him. Thor saw him closing in fast and met with a rock-hard punch in his gut that sent him crashing back to the ground. As he was falling, he saw Issei raise his hand and a black orb of pure energy start to form above his palm. As Issei threw it towards Thor, he was stupid to think he could block it. Raising his hammer up, the sphere connected and a very violent reaction occurred, sending Thor, who was now covered in bruises and burns, sending him out of the forest. The group who currently were with Red was shocked at the explosion that could be seen. That's when they saw Thor crashing into the ground nearby. Before they knew it, Issei was already there waiting to strike yet again. As Thor got up yet again, it was obvious he wasn't done. This time, Thor chuckled a bit and looked at his opponent. "I have to give you props, kid. You have a killer hook, I'll admit, and I might have lost this before it even started, but I'll say this, I'm not quitting until you put me 6 feet under," he said loudly. Issei hesitated just a bit and looked at Thor with a deadly expression. "Then come at me with everything you got," he replied. Thor didn't even hesitate and electricity started to crackle to life around him. He was using his full speed as he leapt at Issei, who managed to barely duck a mere inch or two as Thor crashed behind him. Issei quickly leapt into action and everyone watched as a scalon was being used now. Even if Thor wasn't a dragon, it was still a sword and a good few swings could give Issei a chance to finish it. Thor quickly leaned back to avoid one swipe from Issei, and then his hammer met the edge of blade in a clash of strength. Issei suddenly pushed Thor backwards in an obvious statement. Before he knew it, Thor was kneed in the gut and then slammed into the ground. Issei watched with awe as Thor climbed back up and didn't move towards him. However, he was looking very dangerously at Issei. It seemed that he was going to give it his all in his next attack. Suddenly, the clouds darkened quite a bit this time and Thor had electricity surging through him yet again, but this was more potent and more concentrated. Issei quickly put up a guard as Thor started spinning his hammer and powerful winds were sweeping through. Suddenly, the hammer came flying towards him, creating a sonic boom in the process. Issei knew this one would hit. There was no doubt in his mind. He'd have to take it. That was faster than anything he could have predicted the god would use against him in this fight. So when he was knocked back by the impact of the thrown weapon, he instantly felt it hit hard. As he landed on the ground and realized what happened, he noticed he couldn't lift the hammer. "The reason you can't get it up off you is because you're not worthy," Issei heard faintly. As he peered at the battered god of thunder, something seemed to start to heat up. The tension was high and something had to snap. Issei started to lose sense of the world around him. His vision was blurry and hearing was gone. Except for one thing. A low and guttural growl from something ancient and primal. He realized it was Bahamut and knew the dragon wasn't thrilled. "Issei, it seems this god thinks we aren't capable. Consider this another condition of your revival. Show this god just what a true storm is and don't spare any expense. He will see what we are capable of." His voice was harsh and bitter. That's when everyone else that was spectating the battle saw a pulse of blood-red energy erupt from Issei. It shocked them to their bones. The reason was it sounded just like a heartbeat. Suddenly yet another pulse came out, and this time the energy was potent and thick as the area now was dyed in a dark bloody hue of Issei's aura. The expanse of it was definitely fitting. Thor didn't know what changed in the boy, but something was coming. Something very big. Suddenly another pulse came out and everyone wondered if this was the last one, due to the fact its intensity was higher than the others combined. Suddenly all the energy that was being released started to funnel back to Issei in large amounts. Soon Issei was completely covered in all the energy. It seemed to be peaking too, like it was a time bomb about to obliterate everything in the vicinity to ashes. That's when they heard something they didn't expect and partly didn't want to hear. Annihilation's descent balance breaker. That shocked everyone, even Issei. He was still in a trance-like state, so he wasn't really conscious of what was going on outside his mind and soul. However, those words snapped him back just a bit. With what will he could manifest to keep him focused, he asked the proverbial question. Bahamut, Annihilation's descent has activated the balance breaker. His response was quick. Yes, my friend, I will train you later on how to use it to its fullest abilities. For now, just now that it's the purest form of my power, he will not stand a chance. Don't hold back, Issei, your power is now unmatchable. Let it be known to all who stand before you. Become the herald and let your voice shatter the heavens. Once it all came back, Issei looked down at the hammer that laid on his chest. His fury surfaced as he grabbed the handle in a fit of rage. Everyone looked on in awe, fear, and shock as he climbed out of the small crater he was in, hammer in hand, and was looking very deadly at Thor. The armor definitely stapled fear in their bones as they got a look at it. The armor was a blend of pitch black that ended up in spikes along the shoulder pads, with what looked like blood-red veins coursing beneath them. Did you really think that this toy would really hold me down forever? Issei's voice cut in. Thor suddenly backed up in fear. It wasn't the fact he was able to hold the hammer or how his voice sounded. No, it was the surprised action that happened as Issei walked forwards. His aura now seemed to defy the laws of physics or just his concept of what it meant. However, what he was seeing was something like the devil Surzech's power of destruction, how it was potent and near incomprehensible. This, though, was on another level altogether. The very ground he walked on disintegrated away, leaving tiny craters behind him. The air around him warped and shifted as he made his way through. Thor knew anything he tried now wouldn't do anything. You can take this back, but have it at tenfold the power, Issei suddenly screamed. Suddenly the hammer was thrown, and Thor felt it hit him deep in the gut. He knew his time was coming now, but he'd be damned if he didn't fight it out until the end. A lightning strike was suddenly launched at Issei, who didn't seem fazed. The lightning didn't even hit him, his aura completely swallowed it whole, obliterating it completely before it came into contact with Issei. What is going on? Vali asked on the outside. She asked the Apocalypse dragon, who had a pale face. She knew that he knew something about this new and fearsome power. As he turned to her for once and spoke in a grave voice, she knew he was completely serious. Only a few chosen had the right to see it, and for good reason. That is the cause it is such a lethal and dark ability. Bahamut's true power has finally surfaced in Issei, maybe with the push of the dragon himself to enable it. It is one of Bahamut's most powerful abilities. Take the power of a regular balance breaker with the speed and strength boost of it, and add the power to completely obliterate anything you touch to nothingness. This is only a small fraction of its power. His aura is now a subconscious defense mechanism, allowing him to act without hesitation and no restraint. It will protect him at no order, no will. Just pure subconscious power that has one goal, one reason it was created, to completely annihilate anything in its path. His voice was definitely a reason to know it was the truth. It was shaky and his eyes told another story, like he witnessed it before and knew what the power's potential was. Their attention was grabbed as Issei suddenly disappeared and reappeared before Thor with gleaming eyes. Thor tried to throw a punch, but was shocked to find it in his palm. However, it wasn't that made shock course through his veins. It was what happened when his fist connected. Issei's aura was eating at him, killing him slowly. His skin started to dry up and wither away from his hand. He reeled his hand back and looked at his opponent, who was looking at his fist in awe. Suddenly, Issei's eyes darkened, and he raised his hand to skis. Behold, so-called God of Thunder, this is a true storm created by a true master of the skis, Issei roared. The skis darkened quickly and a massive cloud formed overhead. The rain poured insanely fast and black lightning struck all around him, obliterating everything they struck. Thor didn't know what happened after that. Suddenly he found himself lying on the ground, eating a fist full of dirt, and Issei was towering over him. This is the end, puny god. You said you wouldn't stop until you're 6 feet under. Well, I'll make that a reality, he whispered into his ear. It seemed Issei's speed was now unmatched as he seemed to teleport all over the battlefield, taking Thor with him, all the while damaging him even more to the point of the brink of death. Thor's time was coming and coming very soon. Once again, Issei vanished and appeared high above the air, while choking Thor in a deadly grasp. Thor couldn't speak now. Issei's power was already seeping through his throat, nullifying his vocal cords. "This is the end, Thor. You gave a valiant effort. However, I'm not playing around. Goodbye, God of Thunder," was the last thing he said. Suddenly, Issei entered a trance-like state yet again, but this time he only rose a finger to the god's chest. Obliterate. A tiny but powerful ray of black energy shot forwards, piercing Thor through the chest with no effort, just like a bullet. Thor's eyes dropped down to the gaping hole in his chest. He could feel the energy attacking everything in his body. Issei let go and watched as his opponent wither away as he fell to the ground. Not a single trace of the god's body or energy left. Chapter 25, Horizon P1. To the others, the aftermath of the battle with Loki and Thor made the battleground look like a wasteland. Only a few trees were left standing. "Is it over?" Vali asked. Only Great Red spoke. "I'm afraid it's only begun. Once they realize that Thor and Loki have failed to return, they will come full force. The time has come to realize that the war is at our front door." Vali was about to speak, but footsteps were heard and everyone turned their attention to Issei. He had already dropped out of his new balance breaker and was in his base form. "What the hell was that, Issei?" Issei looked at Rainer and sighed. "I'm sorry if I scared you, but it seems this power will be the weight to tip the balance in our favor." Issei looked at everyone and started to speak. "This is the tipping point of our whole situation. Prepare for the hardest battles to come." Everyone seemed confident in their individual abilities, and Issei saw it clearly. His willpower had rubbed off on them. He was about to continue but started to feel dizzy and nausea coming. However, that didn't make sense. He shouldn't get sick. He was a fucking dragon god now, and illness was a bug waiting to be squashed by him. "You aren't sick, Issei Hyoudou." His eyes widened. "Bahamut Drag, did you guys hear that?" The response wasn't what he was expecting. "I heard nothing. Issei, are you okay? Did the balance breaker cause too much fatigue?" Bahamut seemed to agree with Drag. "Your dragons cannot hear me. This is a temporary connection between just the two of us. I made it that way so you could focus solely on me. Now take a deep breath and listen to what I have to say." Issei relented and did as the mysterious voice asked of him. "Good, now I am going to sever the connection between you and the dragons inside of you for a small bit, so that we don't get off track here." Issei waited for this voice to continue. He wasn't about to interrupt it. Whoever it was clearly not going to take no for an answer. If he could sever the link between him and the dragons that resided in his soul, this entity was very powerful indeed. "I don't have much time with you, so I'll have to go through this fast as possible. You sparked my interest that night in hell when you accepted Bahamut with open arms. Only the foolish or those with tempered wills of steel would do that. You are the latter, and as such I watched you in your journey to see what fruit it would bear. It seems you are the one to change the world. I have no ill will of what you're doing, even if I don't agree on every level of your plan. However, that doesn't dispute the fact that the hand of fate was tempted and it will respond in kind. I knew it the moment I felt the energy you unleashed in the battle with Great Red. You, Issei Hyoudou, have been chosen to stop the end of the world." Issei was at a loss, so he just let the entity continue. "In the incoming days of your war, an opponent you know all too well will appear before you, though they are not the cause. It is the people they have in their group that will plot behind their backs to try to achieve world domination, but will ultimately bring about the apocalypse." Issei was now annoyed. "Enough of these riddles. What will happen and who are you?" He heard a slight chuckle. "It seems your reputation is true. You are stubborn and bull-headed. However, that is what will drive you to victory. As for your question, I must answer it now, due to the fact this will be the last time you hear from me. The apocalypse will be brought on by a group that is in the Chaos Brigade. Their wish is to resurrect the beast I sealed away. Don't worry, even if I can't help you physically, there is someone who will help you in your time of need." Issei was about to ask who he was, but then it hit him. He said the beast he sealed away. That only meant one thing. Issei just talked with God and was told he would save the world after nearly destroying the factions. Talk about irony. The God of the Bible wasn't totally mad about his raging war that was about to peak. The second part about someone else helping begged the question, who was it? His train of thought was interrupted as he focused his attention on his group. Okay, here's what we will do. I want Vali, Biku, Kalawarner, Rainer, and Donaseek to focus on the minions that will be coming along with everyone else. I don't know who all to expect, we will have to see when they arrive. Hiroka, Penemu, Lefay, Arthur, and Cockabeel will face off with the Satans with my help. Great Red will handle Off-Eyes, and we have our allies who will come to our aid when I call them. Let nothing stand in your way, this moment will go down in history forever. Okay, then how long do you think we have? Issei looked at Vali. It will take a bit for word to spread, and so they can mobilize, a few hours I bet. Issei then dismissed everyone and started to think. He had no idea what was going to happen and how this was going to plan out. He knew that he wouldn't give up though, that was obvious. It was time to get the answers he wanted. Before he knew it, he was sitting down. Meditating easily, he awoke to barren world. The city he walked through seemed to have been destroyed. Skyscrapers with broken glass adorned the skyline. Issei was headed towards the direction he would be forever changed. A storm brewed ahead. He looked at it for a brief moment, but continued anyways. As he peered down the edge of the cliff and into the cave, he knew this was where he needed to be. Before he knew it, he found himself in a cavern that had smooth black walls. He wondered what would be further down. With no choice, he started again. This time, the cave took a 90-degree turn as Issei found himself staring at pitch black hole with no bottom in sight. Issei then had an idea. A fireball formed in his hand and he threw it down it. The fireball seemed to go on for an insanely long time before exploding as it collided with the floor. Issei shrugged and jumped down in. Using his wings, he easily softened his descent. However, the moment he touched the ground, he was met with a long river of lava that stretched beyond his eyes. With no choice, he sped towards the end and was met with another revelation. The river seemed to drop out into a crater of a volcano. However, something was wrong. This crater was too big to be a normal one. His eyes widened as he knew he stepped foot into a supervolcano. There were thousands of floating rocks that Issei could see as he peered out into the distance. He should have guessed that it would be something like that for Bahamut to reside in. As he stood in the center, that's when he heard the distant roar. Then he heard the wings of the beast as the dragon himself floated above him for a moment before descending on top of a rock. It is a rare moment for you to come directly to me. Speak and don't waste any words. The look on Issei's face was clearly enough to tell the dragon that he was serious. I want you to teach me about this new power, the one I used with the fight with Thor. Bahamut didn't hesitate and answered Issei. This power you have, Issei, it is more than you think. Your potential is insane, and even more so with this. The power itself manifests its wielder's desires and feeds off of your willpower. Give it a reason to show you its power and it will, but don't be fooled. This power will tempt you and try to sway your views, but will respond in kind to your ability to resist and reject it. Your potential is malleable, as such is this power. It's all up to you. I will teach you how to use the basics, but you must grow on your own. Issei stared at him. So where do we start? Issei thought he saw what looked to be like a smirk on the dragon's face. He didn't know what was coming, as the towering beast above him didn't reply. Issei widened his eyes as a pitch-black and bloody red aura covered Bahamut. Suddenly the dragon was transforming. Issei looked on in stupor as he was now staring at him in a human form. His human form was strange. He was looking at a man who looked to be 60 years old with jagged black hair. He had a cane too. However, his cane was something on a completely different level. The obsidian skull with ruby eyes that his hand touched definitely told Issei something was amiss. The rest of the cane was obsidian as well. Don't look surprised, you should be honored. This form has only been seen by a few beings. There's a good reason I use it, and you will see soon. We are going to start your training. Issei didn't know what to expect. What will we be doing? A mock battle, it's finally time. You will show me what you can do and how you adapt. Don't worry, it will be non-fatal only. I want to see truly how far you can improve. Issei sighed. It's not like I have a choice, so let's do this then. Bahamut nodded and raised his cane, and a violent energy covered the cane. Issei was suddenly on his guard as he felt the pressure start to increase. On pure instinct, he ducked under a bolt of explosive energy that created a sonic boom. He had barely any amount of time to react as his opponent was pressing him hard. One by one, hundreds of bolts were shot out, with no sight of the end of this onslaught. He soon took flight, but to no avail. These bolts were still coming at him. Circling ahead, he dived downwards and turned around and chucked the destructive sphere at the projectiles. He managed to destroy them, but the blast knocked him backwards. He had no time to think as more were shot towards him. With no hesitation, slammed his fist that was covered in scales on the rock he was standing on. The rock started to surf on the lava, heading right for the attack, and Issei waited. Once the bolts were close enough, he leaped overhead and watched them collide with the rock. His target was now in sight, and the distance was closed. Escalon met the shaft of his cane, and it was a stalemate. Issei was surprised. The cane was glowing violently with purple and black now. Bahamut started to push back on him. Issei didn't give up though. With no restraint, he pushed back with all he had. Bahamut felt his rise in power and responded in kind. The stalemate continued. With the amount of energy they were using, something had to give, and both of them knew that. The resulting explosion knocked both of them back, but neither were done yet. Several explosions rocked the area as they went at it again. They both weren't running out of steam either. Issei knew Bahamut was just toying with him. He knew this battle would be something else. Bahamut was up in a flash, and so was Issei. This is the first and the last time that I will warn you, Issei. Don't hold back. We both know this battle is going to go beyond what you've done before, so do not take me lightly. Like I said, it's non-fatal. We are also in your mind, so the damage will not be permanent. Come at me with all you have. Issei heard Bahamut's statement and grinned. When Bahamut saw the eerie grin, he knew that a spark had just come to life. This fight would be interesting, due to the fact he saw something in Issei's eyes. It made him proud and have a ton of respect for the man before him. It seemed it was right. The power Issei used on Thor had already taken a liking to him. There was no doubt in his mind. He could feel the energy growing steadily, slowly, but that didn't matter. It would only take Issei powering up for a fight, then he knew what he would do. He was going to give Issei a small push, but a push that would have astounding effects. This battle would push Issei, and the power would respond like a fire doused in gasoline. He would shatter his limits and evolve his power in such a way that would be unique to only him. His attention snapped back to his opponent as he saw the red energy coat him. Boosted gear. Bahamut's guard was on as Issei boosted and charged at him. Issei's fish met air as Bahamut easily crouched to avoid it, then proceeded to block a kick right after. He then took the opportunity and elbowed Issei in the gut and knocking him back with a smack of his cane. Boost. Issei was already back on his feet and coming at him again. This time Issei threw punch after punch, but still to no avail. He decided then and there. No more games, he was done. Bahamut instinctively leaped back as Issei started to gather a ton of crimson energy. He knew with Dragon's balance breaker that Issei would be a lot stronger and faster. Combined with his own physical strength, he would do much better and maybe even be able to get a hit on him. Once he used his balance breaker, that's when the fight would be truly started. Welsh Dragon Annihilation Balance Breaker. Issei wasted no time as he charged at his target. His fist met Bahamut's palm. Issei quickly grabbed Bahamut's arm and yanked him around and threw him. Dragon Fist. The beam of red energy did a bit to Bahamut, but he got back up easily. Bahamut didn't move though, and that's what surprised Issei. He knew something was coming. Suddenly, a large amount of energy started to gather around him. Before he knew it, Issei was looking at Bahamut in a partial dragon form. The cane disappeared and he now had a bigger build. His wings were large too. However, Issei knew this form would excel in close combat. Bahamut charged as his opponent started to boost over and over again, and clash ensued. Blow after blow was landed again and again on both of them. It seemed like neither were giving up as they continued to trade blows. Issei started to charge up a destructive blast of dark energy. Bahamut knew this was nothing compared to what his balance breaker would do, but it would power Issei up even more. Issei decided to slam it on a nearby rock, causing a wave of lava to rise and surge forwards. Bahamut leaped overhead, which was what Issei wanted. This time, he shot off a quick blast that soared towards the dragon. Bahamut put a guard up just in time as he was hit. Bahamut was surprised as Issei suddenly dropped out of the balance breaker. He wondered what his opponent was up to. Issei started to change into his dragon form, and he soon took to the skis as well. Bahamut grinned. Both of them started throwing kicks and punches left and right. Issei got the drop of Bahamut as he wrapped his tail around him and threw him down towards the crater. He watched as he crashed into a rock and was sent under the lava. He knew Bahamut was fine, and his suspicion was proved true as the dragon burst out and soared towards him. Issei blocked a kick, then leaned back as fist soared just above his head. Issei saw the opening and delivered an elbow to his ribs, then followed it up with a kick on the other side that sent Bahamut flying. The dragon wasn't done yet though. Issei knew this wasn't going to be over for a while. Bahamut started to gather an enormous amount of energy before it was absorbed into his body. Issei knew Bahamut just made himself a lot stronger. He watched as a black and purple energy covered his fist, and Issei suddenly felt the gut-wrenching blow. He didn't know what happened. One moment the energy was just starting to coat the fist, and in a blink of an eye Bahamut delivered the blow. That was pretty much instantaneous. Issei knew there was no point anymore. As he got back up, his return to his human form. His mind was set. It was time. Bahamut was going to get what he wanted. There was really no use in using his dragon form. Sure, it was stronger than D-Drake's balance breaker. However, Issei knew that Bahamut was too powerful now for it. He had no choice but to use his other balance breaker. That's when Bahamut got a large, toothy grin on his face. He sensed it. Issei was calling on it. It was time to see how the next instance of the power would show. He wondered just how far Issei could go with his potential as it was now. That's when the explosion of energy happened. Bahamut knew it was coming. As Bahamut witnessed the powerful aura coming off Issei, he knew his thoughts would be proven true. Issei, on the other hand, felt a little bit different. The power specifically felt weaker than the last time he used it. Maybe what Bahamut said was true, so then it was a test. He shook off his thoughts and focused on his opponent. Bahamut saw the change in expression and his guard was up. As Issei charged, Bahamut did the same. Issei was exerting a ton of pressure on every blow that Bahamut blocked. As Issei threw another punch, his opponent ducked just in time. Delivering a powerful uppercut, Issei was sent skidding back. Bahamut blocked several more before Issei decided to step it up. Bahamut didn't seem to notice the small orb of energy in his hands, and it was slammed into his ribs. The explosion sent him flying into the air. However, the dragon gained control and seemed to hover in the air. Issei felt the dread well up inside of him as Bahamut started to gather a ton of energy in his palm before condensing it. That made his eyes fly open as he knew that small orb of energy in the dragon's hands was now extremely volatile. He knew it was unstable, and it would make the human's nuclear bomb look like a firecracker. Suddenly, Bahamut seemed to teleport right in front of him again, but didn't do anything. It was then he started to speak. "Tell me, Issei, what will you do if you fail?" Issei didn't respond, but Bahamut knew it worked. The look in his eyes told him that a flame was lit, and it was one that would not be extinguished. Issei didn't understand it really. He wondered why he would be asked that. He knew Bahamut had an ulterior motive to ask that. Fail at what? Fail at this battle. Fail at my goal. Wait. Something kicked in his head and his eyes darkened as the mere thought of what would happen if he failed. He felt his blood boil. He knew what Bahamut was getting at. However, he was pissed. He didn't like anyone toying with his emotions. He wouldn't hold it against him, but a little payback he would get. Bahamut realized he just snapped the locks that kept the cage closed. He backed up quickly as the energy around Issei started to react violently. He wasn't really expecting this at all. As the raging torrent of energy sailed high above them, he knew this was going to be the end of it. Suddenly, all the energy started to swirl around Issei as he gained control over his temper, and Bahamut was met face to face with a monster with a hardened stare. As Issei lifted his hands, the energy seemed to flow like water, taking shape of whatever he willed it be. A spear that was black as the night formed in his palm, and with a swift throw it soared at his opponent. Bahamut barely had time to dodge, and he didn't get away unscathed. The spear just clipped him on the ribs, taking on a little bit of flesh. It was only due to the fact he was who he was that the energy was not eating him alive. Issei continued on and gave no mercy. Bahamut was sent flying when 3 spears pierced him out of nowhere. Suddenly, Issei seemed to vanish from his view, and he felt the crushing knee that was delivered right to his back. Issei wasn't done. He instantly grabbed the dragon and launched him high in the air, and then raised his hand. Several dark orbs were fired off in quick succession. Bahamut felt all of them as they collided with each other, only increasing the damage the blast would do. Issei decided it was time to finish it. Yet again, he appeared above the dragon and smashed him downwards with an axe kick. He then took one from his opponent's book and summoned yet another energy blast and condensed it and didn't stop until it was barely visible. With barely any effort, he threw it towards the falling dragon and flew away as the resulting explosion was definitely stronger than anything he'd seen. He knew this war was going to be a walk in the park. He didn't give a damn. He would destroy anyone in his way. Chapter 26, Horizon PT2. As Issei came out of his mind, he was still feeling the anger coursing through his veins. He needed to calm down his temper or he would be blind. That would prove to be a fatal mistake on his part. The others looked at him as he just sat down and started to breathe deeply. They knew he was going through something, so they knew not to press on about the issue. Time would help him, so they just had to wait. However, there were more pressing matters at hand. The war was about to begin, and they couldn't have their leader out of commission, so they were going to say fuck it and turn it around then and there. However, none of them wanted to tempt the beast and it reaped the consequences. It was Kuroko who walked forward despite the risks and decided that she was going to get him to talk about what was on his mind. However, what she didn't know is that Issei knew she was coming and was preparing for the conversation. Acting with no haste, he severed the link with his dragons so that he wouldn't be distracted and could focus. That's when he heard her. Issei, tell me what's wrong. She heard a sigh come out and waited. I had a talk with Bahamut and I know he was only trying to help, but he was toying with my emotions. He heard a response pretty quickly. What did he say? As Issei started to tell her, he noticed her expression was of empathy. When she spoke, his entire being was shaken up. He was flabbergasted and left with no words, with the only thought in his was to protect everyone. Well, I can definitely say that wasn't intentional, Issei. He was testing you to see if your will had faltered. What do I have to say about it? Sure, failure is a possibility, but possibilities are endless, and they are just that. Only possibilities. What truly matters is what you take to heart and how you yourself will change the future by your own hands. Issei didn't know what to think. He knew that every word she said was true. He couldn't dwell on it. His team needed him. With a swift motion, Kuroko found herself in a tight grip, and 2 words were whispered in her ear. Thank you. There was no time to waste. Issei had that gut feeling that the war would be full-blown in a few hours, so it was time to brief everyone. As he got everyone's attention, he spoke. Everyone, the time is now. Something tells me that today the war will truly begin, so there is no going back. We fight till our dying breaths. No matter the odds, we will prevail. Nothing will stand in our way. Are you with me? The response he got was expected. The deafening roar of support rang throughout the underworld. Anyone would be able to hear. He knew they were ready. It was a little bit later, and everyone had rested up enough to regain their strength from the training sessions they were doing. That's when everyone felt it. A massive energy spike was sensed, and everyone knew the armies were mobilized and ready to fight, but so they were as well. Issei motioned for everyone to stay still. They would let their prey come to them, not the other way around. It was time. Before they knew it, they were face to face with the 4 Satans and their army of devils. Issei couldn't count the number of soldiers on the battlefield. He knew a guess wouldn't hit the mark and would fall short of the actual number. He didn't see Grafia though, which made him wonder. His realization came right after. Listen up, leave Surzech alive. I'm going to extract some very useful information from him. Issei's attention was back on the army in front of him. They were cannon fodder, just meant to be a decoy to wear his team down, so he needed a plan. He couldn't, however, wipe them all out with a single blast. No, that would be a waste of energy, and he knew endurance would be key to winning. His real fight would be with Off-Eyes. Her power was infinite, so he had to wipe her out at full power so that she couldn't come back with anything. His eyes focused on Surzech. He wondered how he was in any shape to fight, but he was here and ready to fight. That didn't bother Issei. All their efforts would be in vain. Issei suddenly felt dizzy and fell on one knee. His team looked to him with worry. They tried talking to him, but it seemed he couldn't hear them at all. The Satans saw this and knew it was an opportunity. With one finger, the army was sent forwards, with the Satans leading. Red didn't hesitate and started to bark orders. They needed to buy time. He didn't know exactly what was going on with Issei, but he had an idea. Just before the army had shown up, he had sensed a presence but couldn't make it out. He didn't think Issei had sensed it, for whatever it was deliberately hid itself very well. Red only felt a sample of it before it vanished into thin air. Before the army could get any closer, they stopped as they saw Great Red himself in all of his glory, staring down at them in his full dragon state, at full power. He was ready to lay waste to them. He suddenly launched a massive assault on the army in front of him. It was pandemonium among the devils. They were going to get slaughtered. They knew it too. However, before he could do anything else, the temperature dropped several degrees into the negatives. Everyone looked around but couldn't find the source, but then their eyes turned to Issei, who was standing up, but he was still. The only thing he was doing was holding out his hand as if he was waiting for something to come to it. That's when everyone felt it. The winds were blowing harshly, and they heard a high-pitched whistle. Whatever the object that was soaring through the air, it was coming very fast, and it was headed for Issei. He didn't seem to be bothered by it either. No, it was like he knew it was coming. That's when the whistle got louder and the moment of truth was upon them. They couldn't make out the object since it was moving so fast, and their focus was lost as a sonic boom was heard as it traveled ahead of them. Suddenly they heard a grunt and what seemed to be the ground being kicked up as Issei started skidding backwards. When the dust finally cleared, they got a good look at what he was holding. Most of his team didn't know what it was for, but they knew what it was. A staff. However, Red and the Satans stared at it like they knew exactly what it was. Red was in awe. He couldn't believe that Issei was holding that thing. He knew the tides would be changed greatly with it. The Satans stared at it in fear. They knew exactly what it was and what it could do. Flashback. Issei suddenly felt dizzy and fell on one knee. His team looked to him with worry. They tried talking to him, but it seemed he couldn't hear them at all. He tried talking to his dragons, but he got no response. Someone had severed the link, and Issei knew once again that he had no choice but to wait and listen. It seems the time has come, Issei Hyoudou. The voice seemed familiar, but he couldn't figure out who it was exactly. Who are you? He heard a chuckle and then the response. You already know who I am, you just need your memory jogged a bit. That's when images came into his head of a battle that he remembered all too well. Issei took a deep breath as he realized who had invaded his mind. To what do I owe the pleasure of speaking to you, Hades? Another chuckle was heard. Nothing of major importance, in fact. I'm here solely to help you in your endeavor against the factions. What's the catch? No catch, I'm only here to help and expect nothing in return. I don't have much time, so I will get on with it. You are at the very beginning of your war, and even though you are strong enough to handle the small fry, you know very well that endurance is key to winning this. I hate to say it, but you have more powerful foes to face than Offis in the oncoming days and not the Trihexa. Then how are you going to help me? I will give you my blessing and a gift. Both will be needed. Only with my blessing will you be able to use my gift, but heed my warning. Temper your will even more and the gift will respond. If you don't, it will consume your very soul. You will know what to do when the time comes. And just like that, the conversation was no more. Flashback end. As Issei took in his surroundings, his mind was set. He turned the staff that was held in his hand. It had 3 blue eyes on it along with 2 horns on the top of it. That's when he felt it. The weapon was trying to sap his energy. He wasn't going to let that happen though. Soon enough he got it under control and felt something else. Even though he couldn't hear it, the staff wanted him to plunge it into the ground. Everyone was waiting for a move to be made, and a move was going to be made. However, Issei, being who he was, decided to send out a warning. His voice was amplified so everyone could hear it. Soldiers of the Satans, you have been deceived into thinking you can win this. However, the truth is you are horribly outmatched. Leave now and no harm will fall on you. If you chose to stay and fight, then this place will be your grave. His warning wasn't heard, as it seemed that none of them laid down their weapons. So with his mindset, he knew what he had to do. The Satans watched in fear as Issei jumped high into the air and was coming down fiercely with the base of the staff aimed at the ground. When the staff was finally embedded into the ground, a massive ravine opened up and everyone saw tons of Grim Reapers come out of the ground. It was too many to count. When everything settled, they were staring at a legion of Grim Reapers. However, they weren't moving, except for 2 of them. They were walking towards Issei with intent. When they finally came to a stop, one spoke with a raspy voice. To summon us and the Legion, you must have gained Hades' favor. What do you ask of us? Issei looked at the figure and responded. What is your name? The figure looked odd at Issei for asking that but replied. Thanatos, at your service, and if I may ask, who am I serving? Issei chuckled. Issei Hyoudou, as for my request, you are in the middle of a war. I only ask you to take care of the Satan's armies and any other armies who will arrive soon enough. That's when Thanatos turned around and saw it for himself. I see, then it will be our pleasure, Issei. With one swift motion, Thanatos raised his hand and commanded the Legion to attack, and attack they did. Red watched in awe as every single Grim Reaper took up arms and charged the army of devils. The Satans knew this was going to be the next great war. Red, you're with me. The rest of you team up on a Satan and waste no breath. Today is the day. The future is now and forever changed. Let them feel your power, your determination, and take no prisoners. Everyone roared and charged. It was official. The war had begun. Seraphal found herself face to face with Issei, while Red was facing Akuja. The rest were teamed up against Fabium and Surzech. Akuja looked at the powerful being that stood before him, knowing this wouldn't be an easy fight. Before he could even gather his thoughts, his opponent was charging at him. Wasting no time, Red fired off an energy beam. However, Akuja just summoned a portal and redirected the attack back at the dragon. Red paid no mind though, as he easily deflected his own attack. That's when Red realized a ranged battle wouldn't work. No, it was time to hammer his opponent into the ground. Appearing behind him, Red delivered a powerful punch that sent the devil flying. He knew Akuja wasn't done though, and his suspicion was proved when the devil stood back up. This time an energy blast was fired his way, though just before it hit Red, a portal opened up and redirected the attack away from him. That's when Red decided to take it to the next level. Akuja didn't know what happened. One moment he was staring at his opponent. Then he was lurched forwards, gasping for air. That's when he felt a hand close around his wrist. We're going somewhere where you can't run around like a headless chicken. There will be no escaping me. Everyone watched as a portal closed around the 2 of them as they teleported to the dimensional gap. That's when all hell started to break loose, and everyone knew there was going to be a ton of bloodshed. Seraphal looked at her opponent. She knew it was futile and hopeless. Their armies were now going to be decimated by the legion of reapers that Issei summoned. However, she wasn't going to stand around and do nothing. Boosted gear. She gritted her teeth when she heard that, so it was time. Issei easily blocked a blow from her and retaliated with a dragon shot straight to her abdomen, which sent her flying backwards. However, Issei wasn't done. He quickly appeared right behind her and used another dragon shot aimed at her back. He easily jumped out of the way as an ice spear came soaring at him. Issei smirked. It seems she had a bit of fire in her. It was time to douse that fire. He jumped yet again as another spear soared past him. She couldn't hit him, and she knew it. She decided it was time for a last-ditch effort. Issei wondered what she was planning, as a ton of energy was being focused, and with a single motion, a large ice sphere was rocketed towards him. Issei only put up his hand, and everyone watched as a large mass of destructive energy started to overpower her ice sphere and sent both of them back at her at blinding speeds. She couldn't avoid it, and so the damage was done. The resulting explosion knocked her high into the air, which Issei took that moment and vanished and reappeared above her. She had barely any time to react as she felt his foot slam on her back, sending her crashing down to the ground. She got back up but was severely wounded. She couldn't do much at all. Her armor was starting to fall off, and Issei knew it was time to make an example out of her. Appearing right in front of her, she found his hand wrapped around her throat, crushing it with a ton of pressure. With fear in her eyes, he said something. "You should have known this would happen, Seraphal. Now you pay the ultimate price." He then turned to his enemies and shouted, "This is your fate. None of you will leave here alive. Let this be a reminder of how bad you fucked up." The Satans watched in horror as the life drained from her, and then they heard the unmistakable, undeniable sound of a neck being snapped. Then the sound of a large thud as he threw her lifeless body on the ground. She wasn't going to get up ever again. Surzech realized that he had to do something. There were two of them left against overwhelming odds. With a swift motion, a beacon was deployed, and suddenly everyone felt the signature energy of transportation circles being formed. Before they knew it, the Greek pantheon, Ophis, and the evil dragons, along with the whole Chaos Brigade, were now on the field. Issei realized this was the moment of truth. Issei was pulled out of his train of thought when Bahamut spoke. Sure, he was still a little pissed. However, at a time like this, any advice was worth it. "Let me ask you this, what is the one thing that dragons respect the most?" Issei didn't know where this was going, so he let Bahamut continue. "Power, it has always been just that. This will help you greatly. Those evil dragons can be swayed. Show them that Ophis is an ant to you and they will follow like moths to the flame. Go into your full dragon state and roar with everything you have. It will be near impossible for them to resist you." Issei pondered on that for a moment but decided it was worth a shot. As Issei started to transform, everyone stared at him, wondering what he was about to do. Before their own eyes, Issei had fully transformed into a true dragon. That's when they heard the deafening roar that made even Red wince at its commanding power. Ophis watched in horror as all the evil dragons she was in control of started to wince and shake. She knew what Issei was doing. One by one, every single evil dragon switched sides as they knew Issei's power was unmatched. However, Issei roaring like that caused some more attention. Issei felt another pulse of energy as 4 more transportation circles arrived on the field. Looking around, he saw Yasaka and the Shinto Trinity right by them. "It seems the time has come, and as part of our agreement, we are here, Issei Hyoudou." Issei nodded and thanked Yasaka. His eyes then focused on Azazel and his legion of fallen angels, along with the seraphs and their brave saints. However, the duo his eyes landed on gave him a bit of worry. However, that worry was squashed as he realized they were not a threat. He knew he couldn't beat them in his base form. If he was at his full power, they wouldn't stand a chance. His determination only solidified as he stared at Shiva and Indra. It was truly a sight to see. A war that would go down in history was going to unfold in front of them. A war they would win.